A large field mouse crawled out of the ground and scurried through the snow, looking for food. It could smell the grains while it was still in its burrow. During winter, the animal's fur had grown much denser and made this field mouse look just like a furball. However, before it could scurry far from its burrow, Ren Xiaosu, who was hiding in the snow behind it, suddenly pounced. Having been lying in the snow for a long time, the snow that fell on him had concealed the outline of his body and his breathing. The plump field mouse was so shocked it instantly puffed up its fur. But it was too late for it to get back to its burrow. Nowadays, field mice in the wilderness were extremely quick. If it were the average person, it would be impossible for them to catch it. However, a dagger came stabbing at the field mouse as though it knew beforehand where it was going, pinning the field mouse dead to the ground on the path leading back to its burrow. Cheers broke out in the distance. Zhang Wu and her students were rubbing their hands in the cold weather and cheering with joy. They were going to have meat for dinner again tonight. Ren Xiaosu walked over holding the field mouse by its leg. It takes patience to hunt in the wilderness. The wild animals these days have become smarter. They won't fall for it if you just place some bait out there. If you do not have more patience than them, you'll end up going hungry. It had just stopped snowing, but Ren Xiaosu had lain in the snow for several hours. Although he and Chen Wudi could go out to hunt for wild boars instead, that would not be a suitable hunting method to teach these students. Ren Xiaosu's main purpose was still to teach and earn their gratitude tokens. After Ren Xiaosu finished sharing his experience, the students quickly thanked him with smiles on their faces. In just the short span of a day, Ren Xiaosu had gained more than 400 gratitude tokens by relying on the idolatry of these students. He had always been trying his best to gain as many gratitude tokens as he could ever since he was assigned the side quest. In the end, Ren Xiaosu discovered that students were still the more gullible ones. Ren Xiaosu had been worried that Zhang Wu had brought along too many students and it would delay their escape. But now he felt she had brought along too few students, resulting in him unable to earn more gratitude tokens at a faster rate. Ren Xiaosu would patiently go out and teach the students how to hunt, set up traps, and raid squirrel nests every day. With everyone so well fed during the escape, they looked much healthier, with rosy glows on their faces. As he led the students back to their campsite, he said, "If you manage to find a squirrel nest during winter, it's a really great harvest. It's filled with all kinds of food that the squirrel has stockpiled for winter, so it'll definitely be enough to last you several meals at least. Furthermore, there isn't any worry of being poisoned by food that a squirrel would eat." One of the students asked, "If we clear out the squirrel's food, how is the squirrel supposed to survive through the winter?" Ren Xiaosu comforted, "If you just eat the squirrel as well, it won't have to survive through the winter." When the students heard that, it made sense to them. When Zhang Wu, who was slowly following them, heard how Ren Xiaosu was teaching her students, she was a little conflicted. At the campsite, Yan Liuyuan and company had already set up a campfire. Meanwhile, the students were carrying more firewood over. With the fire able to burn for longer, they wouldn't have to feel so cold tonight. The large group of escapees set up their campsite not far away. Now the escapees just followed Ren Xiaosu's group wherever they went. However, they did not dare approach them. But compared to the initial number of escapees who had escaped from the stronghold, only slightly less than half of them were still able to keep up with Ren Xiaosu's group. Xiaohu took the dagger from Ren Xiaosu and skillfully prepared the field mouse meat. After that, she cleaned off the blood on her hands with some snow. Yan Liuyuan whispered to Ren Xiaosu, "The escapees have already started forming cliques. Just today, I discovered some people ordering others to do their work for them while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor." Ren Xiaosu grunted as he sat at the edge of the campfire and tried to make the fire burn stronger by prodding it with a stick. He added some pine twigs to the fire and heard them crackle. He said, "Ignore them. Such things can't be avoided. At the beginning of an escape, everyone will constantly be on the run. But soon after, some of the smarter and more ruthless people will start making use of others. Such is human nature. In the past, they could live a proper life inside the stronghold by just following the rules and working daily. There were also many types of entertainment outlets for them to spend their money on. Although they worked, they couldn't save much money. They would just repeat their lives day in, day out and have no time to think about other things, Ren Xiaosu continued. But once they come out into the wilderness, they understand what this world is really like. Then Ren Xiaosu sighed. Those strongholds are like a world that the organizations have carefully designed for the residents. Right at this moment, a fracas broke out in the escapees group. Ren Xiaosu looked up and was surprised to see a few of the men attempting to catch a lone escapee. That escapee broke free from their grasp and ran over to Ren Xiaosu's group. "Bro, what should we do?" Yan Liuyuan asked. "Let's wait and see how it turns out." Ren Xiaosu took the field mouse meat and roasted it over the fire. The men ran over as they chased down the escapee. But halfway through, they came to a halt when they saw Ren Xiaosu, who was sitting next to the campfire. The escapee had concealed herself very well. Although the people behind her had already stopped in their tracks, she continued running and stumbling around in the snow. Finally, she fell into the snow not far from Ren Xiaosu's group and stopped moving. That escapee seemed to think that Ren Xiaosu's group would get alarmed by the disturbance, and someone would go over to help her up. But as it turned out, she ended up lying there for over an hour. After some time, Chen Wudi, who was sitting at the edge of the campfire, couldn't help but say, "Master, someone's over there." "Don't worry, she's just sleepy. Let her sleep for a while and don't disturb her," Ren Xiaosu said with a smile. The others might not know, but he could sense that the person lying in the snow had an irregular breathing rhythm. An unconscious person wouldn't breathe that way. Furthermore, she even surreptitiously adjusted her posture just now when she apparently felt a little bit uncomfortable in that position. A moment later, the person lying in the snow slowly got back up. She acted as though she had just regained consciousness. Then she removed the scarf on her head to reveal a beautiful face. Yan Liuyuan whispered, "It's a woman." That woman stared blankly at Ren Xiaosu and the others. "Oh, how did I pass out here? Hello, I'm Fang Yujing." Ren Xiaosu glanced at her. "Since you've regained consciousness, please go back to your side." He was really not interested in a scheming person like her. Although she was beautiful, she was still not the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Don't you guys know who I am?" Fang Yujing was stunned. Everyone in Ren Xiaosu's group speechlessly looked at each other next to the campfire. Ren Xiaosu said, "You might not believe it when I say this, but we really don't know who you are." Moreover, if Fang Yujing were a member of the saboteurs, she would not need to approach him in such a manner. It would be just as how Luo Xinyu had greeted Ren Xiaosu openly after discovering he was her neighbor. Right now, it seemed like the escapees who had started forming cliques had somehow learned of Fang Yujing's identity and wanted to get their hands on her. As a result, she approached Ren Xiaosu's group in a roundabout way to get his help. No matter whether his deduction was right or wrong, Ren Xiaosu did not actually intend to bother with Fang Yujing's plight. If someone made immoral advances on the celebrity again after she went back, Chen Wudi would naturally give them a thrashing. By this point, Ren Xiaosu fully entrusted Chen Wudi with doing all the good deeds. However, Ren Xiaosu still reminded Chen Wudi over and over to try his best not to reveal his superpower. He also told this to Zhongwu as well. When Zhongwu awakened her power yesterday, no one noticed since the escapees were busy fleeing in panic. Therefore, they were just a group of normal people with guns in the eyes of the other escapees. This way, they would not attract any special attention from the corporations when they reached the next stronghold together. This was also the reason why Ren Xiaosu would rather use a gun instead of depending on his powers last night. After all, most of the organizations were not really friendly towards supernatural beings nowadays. Then the faint rumbling of vehicles came from ahead of them. Ren Xiaosu looked up at the sound and was surprised to see a convoy of vehicles approaching them. On the sides of the vehicles, the logo of the Lee Consortium's white spider could be seen. In reality, it wasn't exactly a white spider. It was just a logo in the shape of a nanomachine that resembled a spider drawn with well-defined edges. Ren Xiaosu frowned. The last thing he wanted to see now was the Lee Consortium's people. Hundreds of military transport trucks slowly came to a stop in front of the escapees, and all of their tires were fitted with snow chains. A dozen or so combat platoons jumped out of the vehicles and slowly approached the group. The escapees were crying and shouting for help like their saviors had arrived. It was as though they had finally met their family members again. The officer commanding the platoons asked coldly, "Where have you all come from?" With tears streaming down his face, an escapee said, "Sir, we're residents of Stronghold 109. We escaped from there." Another escapee said in elation, "Didn't I say? The rescue troops would definitely find us. The Lee Consortium hasn't forgotten about us. Sir, do you have any food? We're on the verge of starving to death." But the officer sneered, "I'm not here to save you all. We've been ordered to come to Stronghold 109 to annihilate the invaders. We were instructed to send everyone back to town at Stronghold 108. We aren't responsible for providing any meals to you." The escapees were taken aback. "Aren't you going to give us any aid?" The officer looked at the escapees and told the adjutant next to him, "Do a head count of the escapees." These armed troops of the consortium quickly did a head count of everyone. But during the process, their guns remained pointed at the escapees to prevent them from rioting. When the escapees who had been thinking of protesting against being treated like this saw the guns, they suddenly became as obedient as quails and did not dare say anything more. When everyone saw the army arriving, they were overjoyed, like they had been reunited with their family members. But now they realized these people did not even care about them. Someone finally could not hold back anymore. A young man walked to the front of the crowd and said, "My brother-in-law is a supervisor at Stronghold 108's Public Order Division. Kind sirs, please take me back with you. My brother-in-law will definitely reward all of you handsomely." The officer said with a smile, "All civilians are strictly forbidden to pass through the strongholds now. Even if you all came back with us, you wouldn't be allowed to enter the stronghold. So it's better not to speak all those empty words. I hope you can recognize the situation you're in. You're all refugees from now on and no longer residents of a stronghold." Moreover, claiming that a lowly supervisor at the Public Order Division could reward those of us from the Lee Consortium's army, isn't that too much of a brag? When Ren Xiaosu heard this, he realized the Lee Consortium had probably decided to implement stricter controls on people passing through the stronghold after the lesson at Stronghold 109. This was to prevent any further dangerous elements from getting into their strongholds. However, this was exactly what Ren Xiaosu wanted, as he did not intend to enter a stronghold that was controlled by the Lee Consortium. Who knew what kind of dangerous plans Li Shenton was up to? From the conversation, Ren Xiaosu could tell that soldiers who were under the direct jurisdiction of the Lee Consortium had never thought much of the stronghold's management. This alone was enough to show just how important the army was to the entire consortium. A man wondered, then what should we do when we go back? Are we only allowed to become refugees in town? We really are the stronghold's residents. The officer smiled. You don't have to worry about having nowhere to go. Our Lee Consortium has already started a new round of conscription. All of those who are of suitable age will be required to join the military. Who knows, some of you might end up working under me in the future. As for the women, they'll be sent to the factories to make military uniforms for the new recruits. Since it's wartime, there's no need for me to explain anything to you people." Ren Xiaosu frowned. The Lee Consortium was actually planning to draft soldiers? Surely he wasn't fucking going to get conscripted, right? After the stronghold had been destroyed, the Lee Consortium had lost an entire stronghold of combat troops. In order to face an increasingly dangerous world, it would only be natural for them to recruit more soldiers. Moreover, several organizations were responsible for the destruction of Stronghold 109. If the Li Consortium wanted to seek revenge, they had to first expand their military strength. However, Ren Xiaosu could never have expected that he would really get conscripted. "Bro, what should we do?" Yan Liuyuan muttered. At this moment, the officer said to the adjutant, "Call the private troops and tell them we've located the escapees. Get them over here to escort the escapees back, and make sure to watch over them carefully." After a while, another dozen-odd military transport trucks arrived from behind them. Ren Xiaosu said, "There's nothing we can do now. Let's follow them to the town at Stronghold 108 first. We'll try to find a way to leave when there's a chance." At this moment, it was definitely not practical for them to force an escape from here. If Ren Xiaosu was by himself, he could just leave as he wished. But if he were to go, what would become of Yan Liuyuan and the others? The men and women boarded separate vehicles with the private army soldiers pointing their automatic rifles at them and keeping a close watch. It was as though they were afraid they would try to escape. Before they went their separate ways, Ren Xiaosu looked at Zhang Wu and said, "It's your turn now to protect Xiao while I protect the male students on my side. I'll leave the rest to y'all to watch out for your own safety." Zhang Wu looked at him and said in a serious tone, "I will. You be careful as well." After that conversation, Ren Xiaosu, Yan Liuyuan, Chen Wudi and all the men boarded one of the trucks, while Xiao, Zhang Wu, and the women boarded another. Wang Fugui said with a frown, "We couldn't bring our bicycles with us." The moment he said that, Ren Xiaosu's face turned gloomy. This was probably the first time their group had suffered such a significant loss since leaving Stronghold 113. This was the wasteland. All belongings were but worldly possessions, where things got discarded at a whim. If that saying applied to human lives, it was even more so for bicycles. In the current situation, even though Ren Xiaosu and Chen Wudi were both supernatural beings, it would still be extremely difficult for them to take on an entire unit. Watching the Li Consortium's troops heading towards Stronghold 109, Ren Xiaosu felt that he might not see them anymore in the future. That was because he did not think those troops were a match for over 1,000 experimentals in urban warfare. Unless, of course, the Li Consortium resorted to using heavy weaponry to flatten the stronghold. But a stronghold was built precisely for the resources around it. Would the Li Consortium be willing to completely give up on an entire stronghold just like that? They definitely would not. The price to pay was simply too great if they had to blow up an entire stronghold and rebuild it from scratch. The trucks drove through the snow for 7 to 8 hours straight. During this period, some of the trucks in the convoy broke down several times. It was only at such times that the people in the trucks were allowed to get out to stretch and relieve themselves. The private troops kept an eye on the escapees as though they were supervising prisoners. Ren Xiaosu exchanged glances with Xiao and Zhang Wu from a distance, but they had no idea what the other party was trying to say. After the trucks were repaired, the convoy continued on with its journey. During this time, Wang Fugui was striking up conversations with the soldiers, which was what he was best at. In just a short while, he was on very familiar terms with the soldiers who were assigned to watch over them. When they got back into the truck, Wang Fugui whispered to Ren Xiaosu, "It seems that we're heading straight for the town outside Stronghold 108. I'm sure we all know what these soldiers are like. Once we get there, I'll see if I can get them to secretly exempt us from military and manual labor by offering them some money and antibiotics." The manual labor was referring to the female escapees getting recruited to work in the factories. With someone like Wang Fugui in the group, any news would not become too inaccessible for them. Ren Xiaosu and the others were not good at dealing with people, so Wang Fugui had to be the one to do. Ren Xiaosu asked in a whisper, "Did you ask them what the situation at the other Li Consortium strongholds is right now?" "I asked, and everything is fine for now," Wang Fugui replied. "However, they're on full alert now. The Li Consortium has announced to the world that they're on wartime alert. It seems like war will be breaking out soon." It looks like they're not only gonna be dealing with the experimentals this time. Ren Xiaosu sighed. If it were only about handling the problem of the experimentals, there wouldn't be a need to raise the alert across a dozen odd strongholds at once. But where did the Li Consortium find the confidence to start a war? Surely they didn't intend to rely on their nanomachines, right? Yang Xiaojun had mentioned that even though the research results that everyone had been trying to get their hands on did not get destroyed in time by the Li Consortium, they must have already transferred the research data through their own satellite network. So the Li Consortium's research was definitely not for nothing. At the time, Ren Xiaosu even raised some doubts regarding the matter. If that were the case, the portable hard drive was probably left behind on purpose. If the Yang Consortium decided to use it, it would be better for them to inspect it first. Otherwise, it might turn out to be a trap. Such was Ren Xiaosu's nature. While other people might not overthink things, he would be extra careful and alert as long as he felt there was something unusual. As of now, the best solution was for them to use money to get an exemption from having to serve in the military and perform manual labor. The soldiers were swearing in the truck at having to come out to work in such cold weather. They were quite similar to the private troops in Ren Xiaosu's memory. These troops were also very greedy and always thinking about money. In the truck, Wang Fuegui quietly swapped the most valuable items to Ren Xiaosu so he could stuff them into his storage space. That would prevent the soldiers from getting any ideas in case they saw the valuable items they had. The escapees in the truck had ashen looks on their faces. They thought they would be rescued once the Li Consortium's troops arrived. No one expected it would turn out like this. Going from a stronghold resident to a refugee, they were rather unable to accept such a fall from grace. Just as they were about to arrive at the stronghold, the private army's convoy suddenly came to a halt. Then an officer who did not even bother wearing his beret properly said while tucking his thumbs in his belt, "Look, we also don't wish for all of you to suffer as soldiers or manual laborers, but it's not up to us since these orders came from above." An escapee begged, "Sir, I've got problems with my knee. I really can't be a soldier." A woman also begged, "We really don't know how to sew. We've never done anything like that before." With a smile, the officer of the private army said politely, "Don't worry, it'll be easy to pick up. However, I have another solution. I'm very familiar with Commander Li, who's in charge of the draft. If any of you have any ideas, I can put in a word for you. But it's certainly not enough to just talk about it. Let me make this clear, I do not stand to gain anything from this. All I'm trying to do is to plead on everyone's behalf." Ren Xiaosu immediately knew that he was hinting at getting some bribes. Someone immediately took off his wristwatch. "Sir, this watch is a soaring bird. I just bought it last year." The officer immediately beamed and said, "Note his name. Is there anyone else who wants to be exempted from military or manual labor?" Wang Fuegui immediately went over and pulled the officer aside. "Sir, my name is Wang Fuegui. I've got a 100 antibiotics and 5 branded watches over here. However, there are quite a few of us who would like to get exempted." When the officer heard that he had a 100 antibiotics, his eyes popped out of their sockets. When he heard he was being offered 5 watches as well, his eyes shone brightly. Wang Fuegui said softly, "The thing is, we have more than 20 students in our group. Just think about it, what are students capable of doing? They won't be able to contribute at all. Besides, students are the foundation of our future. Wouldn't it be such a waste for them to become soldiers or female workers?" The officer looked at Wang Fuegui. "The female students can be exempted but the male students can't. To be honest, the bottom line is that all men of the right age must be conscripted. If I dare to overstep this line, I'll get executed tomorrow." When Wang Fuegui heard this, he started panicking. He couldn't care less about other people, but Ren Xiaosu definitely couldn't be conscripted. He pointed to Ren Xiaosu and said, "Didn't you just exempt someone from military service? To be honest with you, the person who was exempted is too old and not within the conscription requirements at all, the officer said with a smile. Old Wang could completely understand that manual labor could be exempted, but military service was unavoidable. The middle-aged man who handed over his watch had purely been taken for a sucker. He rephrased his words and said, "Look at that person over there. He might look young, but it's only because he has kept his face well maintained. I hope this won't make it sound like a joke, but he's actually my uncle." Fuck. The officer was chuckled. "Old Wang, can you be any more shameless than this?" "No means no. With these antibiotics and watches, I can only exempt the girls from their manual labor. But the men are all of suitable age, so they won't be exempted from military service." Wang Fugui sighed. Wang Dalong and Yan Liuyuan did not have to be conscripted as they were too young. But based on the current situation, it was certain that Ren Xiaosu, Chen Wudi, and all 8 of Zhongwu's male students would have no choice but to serve in the military. Right now, only 10 people in their group were required to serve in the military. This consisted of Chen Wudi, Ren Xiaosu, and the 8 male students. The remaining people would be allowed to stay in town for the time being. Who could have everything go their way in a chaotic world like this? This was already a very good outcome. After the soldiers finished receiving their bribes, they continued on their journey. After an hour, they finally arrived at the outside of Stronghold 108. To Ren Xiaosu's surprise, the town outside the stronghold was much livelier than the other towns he had been to. Construction vehicles could be seen shuttling back and forth. There was even a huge military base stationed just outside the town. It seemed that the Li Consortium had already gathered a lot of its military forces outside Stronghold 108. Although it was early morning, it was extremely busy outside the stronghold. Ren Xiaosu was puzzled. Even if Stronghold 108 was the closest to Stronghold 109 where the experimentals now were, was it really necessary to gather so many troops here? When they got out of the vehicles, the officer in charge of escorting them immediately instructed those who had paid bribes to run into town via a narrow trail to avoid getting drafted into manual labor. The remaining people were made to stay there to await further instructions. The officer chuckled and said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Li Qingzheng, and I'm going to bring you all over to the conscription office now for a physical examination. I'll secretly share some good news with you all. As long as you pass the test, you stand a chance of returning to the stronghold. In any case, I'm not that fortunate. But for you all, it's all up to your own luck." Ren Xiaosu was a little puzzled. Was this a normal physical? It could even decide whether a person would end up becoming a refugee or a stronghold resident. They followed Li Qingzheng and came to a large military tent. At this moment, a group of people happened to be coming out of the tent. One of them said excitedly, "I can get into the stronghold. I can go live in the stronghold." Li Qingzheng was watching that man's excitement with a grimace. What a lucky man! A refugee has been elevated in status just like that. He looked at Ren Xiaosu and the others while explaining, that person was previously a refugee from Stronghold 107's town. However, he's become a stronghold resident after being sent here and taking the physical. Interesting, right? Ren Xiaosu stood outside the tent and looked at that man from behind. He suddenly felt that this physical examination was likely to be related to the Li Consortium's new technology. Everyone stood in line and waited for their turn to enter the tents. Currently, the physical examination was being carried out in more than a dozen tents within the military base at the same time. Not only were there refugees undergoing the physical examination, but even the active servicemen of the Li Consortium were required to go through the physical examination again. Ren Xiaosu went into one of the tents. However, the physical examination being carried out on the inside was not what he had expected. There were only several people dressed in white coats standing in front of an apparatus. The person undergoing the physical examination was required to sit on a stool that was attached to the apparatus. He was also wearing a metallic ring that was connected to some wires on his head. A person in a white coat read the data and said, synchronization rate at 3%, fail. The staff member next to him dismissed the person who was undergoing the physical examination. You did not pass. Ren Xiaosu slowly moved all the way to the back of the line. He kept having a feeling that something was off about this. Li Qingzheng chuckled, what, don't you want to get back into the stronghold? I heard you used to be a stronghold resident. Ren Xiaosu glanced at him. Aren't you a stronghold resident? No, I only became a platoon commander because the private army's strength increased. But I was also a refugee before, Li Qingzheng said with a smile. So it turned out that the Li Consortium was increasing its military strength all across the board. Even refugees were being recruited into the private army now. At this moment, one of the people in the white coats said, synchronization rate at 81%, pass. Record this person's details into the personnel database. Ren Xiaosu asked, what does this synchronization rate mean? I'm not sure either. Li Qingzheng said, anyway, if you can pass the test, you'll be allowed into the stronghold. But if you fail it, you'll become one of my men. The man who passed the test was an escapee who had fled together with Ren Xiaosu's group from Stronghold 109. He asked the doctor in disbelief, am I allowed to enter the stronghold? The doctor in the white coat glanced at him and said indifferently, congratulations. Your name? Ha ha ha, I can finally enter the stronghold, the escapee said excitedly. The doctor said impatiently, name, please. Lin Qi. My name is Lin Qi, the escapee answered excitedly. Then someone took him away. One by one, the people in their group stepped forward for the physical examination. The synchronization rates of the 8 male students basically fell between 40% and 60%, but the passing requirement was apparently much higher than that. When it came to Chen Wudi's turn, the doctor frowned. Synchronization rate at 1%. Why is it so low? But Chen Wudi seemed unaffected by the result. When the doctor asked him to leave, he asked Ren Xiaosu in a whisper, Master, why is my synchronization rate only at 1% and so much lower than theirs? It might be a test of whether your brain is functioning properly or not. Ren Xiaosu hesitated for a moment before replying. It's only because there's something wrong with your brain that you scored 1%. At this moment, the doctor urged Ren Xiaosu to come forward for his turn. At one point in time, Ren Xiaosu felt that his synchronization rate would somehow turn out to be surprisingly high. But what if he got selected to enter the stronghold? He wasn't keen on entering the stronghold at all. When Ren Xiaosu placed the metallic ring over his head, he felt like there were some barely discernible strands of silk threads trying to communicate with his mind. They felt like a physical presence in his mind, but before those threads could connect with the palace, they started snapping in quick succession. A second later, the doctor opposite him said in a surprise, synchronization rate at 0%. How can that be? Nearby, Chen Wudi said with a look of sarcasm, Master, don't get too upset. Ha ha. Ren Xiaosu was confused. Was it because of the palace that his results were 0%? Then the doctor said, record it. Neuron interfacing was a complete failure. He called out to the person after Ren Xiaosu, next. If Ren Xiaosu had not said those words to Chen Wudi, he would definitely have been accepting of this result. But now, he found it really hard to swallow. Although he did not wish to pass this test, his score should at least be higher than Chen Wudi's, right? Doctor, Ren Xiaosu said in a serious tone, I think I can get a better result than that. There must be something wrong with the machine. How else could I have scored so low? The doctor shot him a look. Don't waste the stronghold's resources. Next. As Ren Xiaosu got dragged out of the tent by Li Qingzheng and the others, he kept shouting, Doctor, please give me another chance. The doctor in the tent said coldly, I've seen loads of people like that. It's going to be the same no matter how many times they get tested. What a bunch of good-for-nothings. However, when the next person sat down on the apparatus, the doctor froze. Why is there no reaction? It's not displaying any data at all. Could the machine be faulty? Someone asked softly. The doctor keyed in a 16-digit pin on the apparatus to unlock the refrigerated chamber in the middle where a bottle of silvery, liquid-like substance could be seen. The doctor puzzledly took another bottle of the liquid and replaced the one in the chamber. The machine was immediately restored back to normal. He handed the bottle of liquid he took out of the machine to his assistant. Send this back to the stronghold for checking. There might be some problems with this bottle of nanomachines. Monitor, what is this synchronization screening about? A student asked. As they were all classmates, they continued addressing Ren Xiaosu as their class monitor, even calling him teacher sometimes. Ren Xiaosu did not hide it from them. He gave it some thought before sharing his assumption with them. The Li Consortium has made a breakthrough in nanorobotics and neurotechnology. It seems like they're selecting suitable candidates as hosts for the nanomachines. Indeed, the Li Consortium had immediately put their nanorobotics technology into military use after they saw a breakthrough in their research. If it were really as Luolan had said, nanomachines could help humans gain a stronger skeletal structure, muscles, and even achieve other improvements. At that time, the Li Consortium would probably try to build an elite unit that was assisted by nanomachines. However, Ren Xiaosu somehow felt that it would be extremely uncomfortable to have machines placed into his body. The officer named Li Qingzheng looked at Ren Xiaosu and the others with a smile. Everyone, follow me. We'll go and handle the registration first. After that, you'll all be my men starting from today. Stick with me, and we will have good food and wine together. Ren Xiaosu looked at him. At present, Li Qingzheng still wore his beret crookedly, while his collar was also unbuttoned. It was like he was just some ruffian. No, he was exactly what a real ruffian would look like. Ren Xiaosu walked over and shook Li Qingzhen's hand. At the same time, he stuffed 2 banknotes into his hand and said, "Pleased to meet you, Platoon Commander Li." Seeing how Ren Xiaosu understood the rules, Li Qingzheng beamed. Don't worry, everyone. I just become an officer, so let's not have any bureaucracy between us. Let's all be brothers from now on. With just 2 banknotes, their superior-subordinate relationship had now changed to a brotherly relationship. Ren Xiaosu asked, "Where are we heading now?" "Let's get all of your registrations completed first. Then we'll head to an outpost at the front after getting your uniforms. The entire outpost will be all ours," Li Qingzheng said in high spirits. Ren Xiaosu had some doubts about this. Wasn't Li Qingzheng just a platoon commander in the private troops? How could he possibly command an entire outpost? Aren't we going to be carrying out our duties nearer to the stronghold? Ren Xiaosu asked. There are still some factories out there. We need to protect those factories from being attacked, Li Qingzheng explained. We'll be fine. Y'all don't have to worry at all. I've been practicing martial arts with the blacksmiths in town since childhood. I'm proficient in many types of boxing now. When Ren Xiaosu heard that, he did not exactly feel better. It was fine that he had to serve in the private army, but how did he end up getting drafted into such a haphazardly assembled group of soldiers? Li Qingzheng looked at Ren Xiaosu and said, "Although you look a little skinny, have a really low synchronization rate, and don't look to be much of a soldier, you can rest assured that Big Brother Li here will protect you." Thanks, Big Brother Li, Ren Xiaosu said. After his dexterity went up, he did look a little on the skinny side. The students beside them all looked at one another, not knowing what to say. To them, it looked more like Li Qingzhen's brains would get smashed out of his head with just a single punch from Ren Xiaosu. At this moment, 7 other escapees in the group were also required to perform military service. These escapees looked grief-stricken. They had thought that refugees were the most inferior humans in the world and were only born to serve the stronghold residents. But they could never have expected they would end up becoming refugees themselves one day. Since Ren Xiaosu was the one who paid the money, he was Li Qingzhen's brother. But these other escapees did not have any money on them to pay him with. Li Qingzhen looked at them with a different expression. You people over there, hurry it up. Who are you trying to gain sympathy from with your crying? You'll feel better once we get to the outpost. Originally, Li Qingzhen only had about a dozen soldiers under him. But now he had finally gathered up to a total of 30 soldiers to make up a full platoon. Ren Xiaosu learned from Li Qingzhen that they were going to be serving under 8th Platoon, the Iron 2nd Battalion of the Private Army. At this moment, Li Qingzhen was still unaware of what kind of people had joined his unit. Their group went and registered. When they were collecting their uniforms, the soldiers of the Logistics Division informed them there was a shortage of uniforms, and they would be issued at a later date. Ren Xiaosu wondered just how big of an expansion the military was undertaking that they could not even afford to issue them with uniforms. Were they going to guard the outpost in their current attire? Wasn't the conscription carried out too fucking hastily? Even though the stronghold had expanded the size of the private army, they did not give them any priority. When it was time for them to collect their weapons, they were not even issued with firearms. Along the way, he suddenly saw Yan Liuyuan standing outside the military base. Neither of them spoke, and Yan Liuyuan simply threw a note over the wooden fence. Ren Xiaosu opened it up and read, "We've settled down in town. Everything is fine." Ren Xiaosu could finally feel relieved. At this moment, Li Qingzhen shouted from a military transport truck not far away, "Brothers, get in. We're setting off to the outpost." Ren Xiaosu walked to the truck after giving a nod to Yan Liuyuan. He was unsure of what kind of outpost he would be assigned to. The moment he figured out his situation, he would take Yan Liuyuan and the others away. Meanwhile, the bottle of silvery, liquid-like nanomachines was being sent into the stronghold. A researcher draped in a white coat was standing in front of the stronghold's gate and having his ID checked. When the garrison guards saw his special identification papers, they immediately let him through. They even prepared an exclusive car for him to send him to Research Facility 613, located on the inside of the stronghold. As the researcher sat in the car, he thought about something. Since their nanorobotics technology had become mature, it would still be justifiable if only one or two of the nanomachines were defective. But for an entire bottle to be defective was a little strange. The number of nanomachines contained within this bottle of silvery liquid was simply astronomical. They couldn't possibly all be defective, right? Nanomachines were not exactly smaller than a nanometer. They would just have to ensure that their operating tentacles were in the range of nanoscale levels, with the individual body size of each nanomachine at approximately 4 nanometers. What is a nanometer? A nanometer is equivalent to 0.0000000001 meters. If this entire bottle of nanomachines were defective, then it would definitely not be due to a technical issue but some other reason. He was extremely confused and also highly suspicious. When he arrived at Research Facility 613, he walked straight into the research building and said to the secretary, "I would like to see Mr. Li." The pretty secretary adjusted her glasses. "If you have anything, just tell it to me. Mr. Li is very busy. We've encountered a minor problem with this thing here." The researcher said, "Please let Mr. Li know immediately. You can place it here with me and write down your contact information. I'll inform you when we get results." Multiple cases of defective nanomachines due to operational error have occurred across the various strongholds today. "Mr. Li is busy handling all that right now," the pretty secretary said nonchalantly. The researcher was stunned. The nanomachines were damaged due to operational error? But why did he somehow feel that their situation here was different? He clearly remembered that there was no mistake in the way he operated the machine. He said in earnest, "I'll go back and wait for your news. But please make sure to explain to Mr. Li that there was no operational error with our bottle of nanomachines. The circumstances surrounding its failure were extremely suspicious." The secretary gave him a look and then pasted an urgent label on that bottle of nanomachines right before his eyes. Only then did the researcher give a sigh of relief. "Thank you." But what he did not know was that there were already hundreds of bottles of samples labeled urgent that had been sent into the laboratory. When they passed by several factories along the way, Li Qingzheng introduced the place to them. "These are the Li Consortium's oil refineries, and our outpost is just up front. Our daily responsibility will be to observe any signs of approaching enemies. If there are, we have to report it immediately through the satellite phone." Ren Xiaosu asked, "What do we do after reporting it?" This question stumped Li Qingzheng. The higher UPS had not mentioned what actions to take after reporting an intrusion. Were they supposed to defend the place until reinforcements arrived, or should they retreat? It seemed like their task was just to keep watch and function as an early warning system. But Ren Xiaosu felt they would be risking their lives by keeping watch here. They were not issued with any uniforms or firearms. An entire platoon consisting of 30 people only had 11 automatic rifles and just over 20 magazines with them. What else could they be other than cannon fodder? However, Li Qingzheng was not too worried about that. Just think about it. A large contingent of soldiers from the combat troops have already been deployed to Stronghold 109. If there's any danger, they'll be the ones to handle it. What do we have to worry about? What if other organizations start a war? Ren Xiaosu asked. That won't happen. Li Qingzheng waved it off and said, "How can there still be wars in this era? I've never witnessed a real war since the day I was born." When Ren Xiaosu heard that, he did not say anything more. Even the refugees were used to living in these peaceful times. Everyone always thought that war was something very far away from them, and even Ren Xiaosu also had such thoughts. But Ren Xiaosu felt that something was not right. What if the Li Consortium initiated an attack on others? What if those frontline troops of the Li Consortium couldn't beat back the experimentals? If war was not coming, the Li Consortium would have no reason to mobilize so many troops. Moreover, the various organizations would also have spies planted inside the other strongholds. If the Li Consortium started ramping up its war preparations, that would make the other organizations nervous as well. It was like they were all tied together by a single rope. If someone pulled too hard, it would tighten around the others. Once the rope snapped, war would break out. "We've arrived!" Li Qingzheng shouted excitedly, "This will be our outpost from now on." When Ren Xiaosu jumped out of the truck, he was stunned after looking around at the place. He could only see a row of small, one-story houses standing on the hilltop in front of him with a big mountain behind. This was the middle of nowhere. No one was in the outpost. It seemed like 8th Platoon of the Iron Second was going to have this outpost all to themselves. It was no wonder Li Qingzheng could speak so pompously back then. Li Qingzheng pointed at the top of the mountain as he stood on the flat ground of the outpost. "Every day, 5 of you will be on sentry duty on a rotating basis in the watchtower up there, where you'll check for any signs of the enemy. If a situation crops up, report it immediately to the higher UPS." "Is that all?" Ren Xiaosu asked. "Right, there's nothing else." Li Qingzheng said with a smile, "Supplies will be delivered to us regularly, so we don't have to worry about anything at all. All we need to do is to keep a close eye on this direction." "Who will come from this direction?" Ren Xiaosu asked. "How would I know?" Li Qingzheng was amused. "No one goes into those mountains, and neither will anyone come out from there. So we can all just rest assured that no one will attack us." Ren Xiaosu made a rough guess of their current position. They should be situated at one of the northernmost outposts in the area controlled by the Li Consortium. Which organizations were to the north? The Qing Consortium or the Yang Consortium? Ren Xiaosu asked him, "Do you know where Stronghold 88 is?" Li Qingzheng was surprised. "I don't know." All right, Ren Xiaosu would just have to ask someone else when there was an opportunity. He should have asked Yang Ziajin back then. After everyone unloaded the supplies from the military transport truck, Ren Xiaosu estimated their supplies would only last the 30 of them 7 days at most. He wondered if the subsequent resupply would be delivered on time. Seeing as the Li Consortium was busy on all fronts, who knew if they would forget about them over here? When Li Qingzheng saw Ren Xiaosu's expression, he said with a smile, "Bro, I know y'all are looking to leave this place. But in the current circumstances, even if you escape back to town, you might not be able to leave with the others. There are many military bases stationed all over town, and there's so many of you as well, so how are you going to leave? Y'all will probably get caught and interrogated before you can even step out of there." Ren Xiaosu realized that even though Li Qingzheng looked rather stupid, he was well aware of the situation. He clearly knew that Ren Xiaosu's mind was not present. Li Qingzheng added, "I suggest you just stay here for now. If there's an opportunity in the future, I'll try to transfer you back to the town. Then you can get together more often with your relatives and friends." Ren Xiaosu knew Li Qingzheng was hinting at more money, but he still thanked him anyway. "Okay, I'm counting on you then, Platoon Commander Li." "Haha, no need to be polite," Li Qingzheng said with a smile, "you can just stay at this outpost with no worries. If enemies really do come, I'll chase them away with my boxing. There's nothing for y'all to be afraid of." Li Qingzheng had also found out that Ren Xiaosu and his group used to be students from Stronghold 109 and that Ren Xiaosu was the class monitor of the group. To him, it was normal that a group of students would feel afraid coming to such a place. As a big brother, he had to comfort them a little. The students beside them did not say anything as they unloaded the supplies. They did not know what expression to make when they heard Li Qingzhen's words. Right at this moment, Li Qingzheng laughed, "Y'all don't have to do this work. Just let the stronghold residents do it. Didn't they used to despise us refugees? It's time we let them experience the life of a refugee." The students looked at Ren Xiaosu, who said to Li Qingzheng with a smile, "Let's work together instead." Although he also did not really like the stronghold residents, it was not enough to make him want to order the 7 escapees around. Li Qingzheng said with a smile beside him, "You students are really kind, but it's a shame you didn't pass the synchronization test. I heard that those who passed the test will become true elite troopers who can fight against a 100 opponents." Ren Xiaosu was still skeptical about the idea of one person fighting against a 100. To be honest, he had his own path to follow. So he was not envious of those who had passed the test. The only problem was that he felt a little uncomfortable when he saw the compassionate look in Chen Wudi's eyes. Suddenly, Ren Xiaosu looked up and saw the majestic Wolf King standing on the summit of a mountain and watching him quietly. He was shocked to realize the wolves were still following him. When the Wolf King saw that Ren Xiaosu had noticed it, it did not avoid his eyes. After a while, it disappeared into the mountains. Li Qingzheng followed Ren Xiaosu's gaze and looked at the mountain as well, but he saw nothing there. "What are you looking at?" Ren Xiaosu smiled. "Just enjoying the scenery." Suddenly, wolves howled. Everyone jumped up in shock. Li Qingzheng said in panic, "There's actually wolves in those mountains." But Ren Xiaosu did not feel any fear this time. "It's better than getting eaten by the wolves." An escapee said, "You haven't seen how huge those things are, but we encountered them when we were escaping. They're even bigger than bison." "Are you serious?" Li Qingzheng had not seen any wolves in a long time. When he heard about how big the wolves were, he couldn't help feeling a little nervous. But as the platoon commander, he had to reassure everyone. "Don't be afraid. I did not train in martial arts for nothing. Besides, aren't we also equipped with guns?" When the escapees heard the word guns, they suddenly remembered that Ren Xiaosu and his group also had guns on them while fleeing from Stronghold 109. Moreover, their group was extremely intimidating at that time too. Just as they were about to say something, they noticed Ren Xiaosu staring at them with an ambiguous smile. The escapees realized if they snitched on him, they would have nowhere to escape to. So they held back from speaking. Furthermore, Li Qingzheng obviously disliked them as they used to be stronghold residents, so there were also no obligation for them to remind him. For some reason, the escapees suddenly did not feel so scared anymore when they realized they were in the same outpost as Ren Xiaosu's group. Eventually, Li Qingzheng and his original batch of soldiers were the only ones who were still afraid. Li Qingzheng and his men held their guns for a long time and waited, but the wolves did not show up. He slowly felt more at ease and said, "Let's clean up the place first. I think those wolves are also afraid of us since we have more people and guns as well, so they don't dare to come here." It looked like the outpost had been abandoned for a very long time. The pots and pans inside were all covered with a thick layer of dust. It would require a great deal of effort for them to clean up the place if they wanted to live in it. The escapees did their chores in a trance. Li Qingzhen's attitude towards them made them feel inferior to refugees. It felt like they had become the lowest class of humanity in this world. Ren Xiaosu had no sympathy for them, but he would not deliberately ostracize them either. The escapees knew he was a ruthless person, and they subconsciously wanted to get on better terms with him. Since Li Qingzheng did not like them, they would have to find another backer somehow. Everyone was harboring their own thoughts in this small outpost out here. Only the students were busy working with great enthusiasm and performing their tasks with great efficiency. Li Qingzheng was still a little unsettled because of the howling from the wolves. He kept considering whether he should call the private army's headquarters to ask for reinforcements. But when he finally made the call, he did not receive any help he was expecting even after being ridiculed by them. The person on the other end of the line also warned him not to make false reports of the enemy. Otherwise, they would court-martial him. When Li Qingzheng saw Ren Xiaosu continue cleaning with the students like nothing had happened, he asked, "Aren't y'all scared?" Ren Xiaosu hesitated for a moment before saying, "Oh yes, I'm so scared." The students nodded quickly in unison. "Yeah, we're really scared." Li Qingzheng felt that Ren Xiaosu and the students were just mollifying him. In reality, Ren Xiaosu had already told the students in private while they were escaping that the wolves would not attack them. Although the students did not know why Ren Xiaosu said that, Ren Xiaosu was proven right. Since Ren Xiaosu was not worried, what was there for them to be worried about? Ren Xiaosu asked Li Qingzheng, "Platoon commander, why did you choose to be a soldier?" "For the pay, of course." Li Qingzheng explained, "If I were rich, who would be willing to come to this god-forsaken place and be a soldier? Have you heard yet? The Pyro Company is offering to buy the blood of supernatural beings. You can get 1 million yuan in exchange for a drop of blood. If I were a supernatural being, I would sell my blood every day until the Pyro Company goes bankrupt." Ren Xiaosu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Who in the right mind would risk selling their blood just to earn some money after becoming a supernatural being? After cleaning up the place, everyone stared at each other blankly, as they were unsure of what to do next. But in actual fact, this was just how it was in a remote outpost like this. Boredom was simply a part of their daily lives. At this moment, Li Qingzheng let out a sigh and said, "To be honest, it's such a pity for you stronghold students to come here to be sentries. With all the knowledge that you have, there's nowhere you can apply it to. Y'all have studied for over a decade for nothing." Ren Xiaosu was taken aback. He had heard from Zhongwu before that she hoped the students could further their studies in the future, and that these children were all fine saplings who studied very hard and were also very smart. He looked at the remaining 8 students and suddenly said, "I have some textbooks with me. Starting from today, y'all can study by yourselves whenever you have free time. If there's a chance, I'll buy some advanced textbooks from town for y'all. Even though we're now in a place like this, you can't fall behind in your studies." The students were stunned. "We're going to self-study here." They were more interested in learning how to hunt, how to protect themselves, and how to protect others now, rather than continue their education. After experiencing the cruelty of this world, the students' thoughts on education had started to waver. Sometimes, they would wonder if education was even useful at all. Ren Xiaosu explained patiently, "I'm your class monitor." Back then, the student counselor said that it's the duty of the monitor to ensure that everyone studies hard. The students could not find any words to refute him with. Then Ren Xiaosu continued, "In life, your friends might betray you one day, or your lover could betray you, but math, physics, and chemistry will not." The students were dumbfounded. What kinda nonsensical crap was that? Ren Xiaosu whispered to them a promise. "Study hard, and I'll take y'all to the mountains to practice shooting firearms tomorrow." This time, the students broke out with smiles. Looking at these students, Ren Xiaosu got the thought that the Yang Consortium was probably also making use of this time to research the nanomachines. If there were no repercussions from its usage, it might be a good idea to give these students some self-protection abilities using the nanomachines. The next morning, Ren Xiaosu was still sleeping in the house when he heard Li Qingzheng shout from outside, "Quick, come out and have a look." Ren Xiaosu put on his clothes and went outside to have a look. He saw a goat lying at the door of one of the houses in the outpost. He also noticed some packed snow in front of the door where a neat row of large wolf prints could be seen. Ren Xiaosu immediately looked around and saw the Wolf King up on the summit of the mountain again. When it saw Ren Xiaosu looking over, it turned around and disappeared into the wilderness. It was as though it had stood there just to greet him. This goat was as large as a domesticated cow, and it would probably take several days for everyone at the outpost to finish eating it. Even though there were some changes to domesticated animals nowadays, they were not as great as the changes seen in the wild. The wolves must have hunted this goat in the mountains. While Ren Xiaosu was thinking about that, Li Qingzheng was belly laughing. "I never expected the wolves would offer tribute and bow down before me after I arrived at this mountain. Don't address me as Platoon Commander Li anymore. Call me the Lord of Wolves instead." Ren Xiaosu's eyes twitched. This fellow was too good at elevating his own status. Off to the side, Chen Wudi was wondering if he should beat up Li Qingzheng since the title Lord of Wolves sounded like a demon name. "Not for now, no," Ren Xiaosu replied. Chen Wudi understood that Ren Xiaosu meant that Li Qingzheng might have to be subdued at some later point. "Master, when can we eat some goat?" he slurped. "How about now?" When Ren Xiaosu heard Chen Wudi slurping, his expression nearly turned dark. As the group prepared to cut the goat up and make the campfire, the male student named Wang Yuji looked at Ren Xiaosu curiously. He lowered his voice and asked, "Monitor, when the wolves last appeared, you brought back such a large rabbit so quickly in the heavy snow. When the wolves appeared this time, they took the initiative and gave us a goat. Isn't that too much of a coincidence?" Chen Wudi and the students all looked at Ren Xiaosu. Wang Yuji had spoken quietly enough that only their group heard it. Ren Xiaosu could only look at them and say with a laugh, "Haha, it truly is a coincidence." Since the situation had come to this, he could only claim it was a coincidence. Wang Yuji wondered, "Monitor, did the wolves present you with the rabbit as well? Was that why you said we didn't have to worry about them?" Ren Xiaosu thought to himself that these students were indeed smart. They could figure out the truth with so few details. He whispered, "Don't say that to anyone else." After all, it would cause somewhat of a sensation if there were any mention of his interaction with the wolves. Since Li Qingzheng was willing to be the scapegoat, Ren Xiaosu was more than happy to let him do it. But Wang Yuji said, "Do we need to give anything in return?" "I don't think so." Ren Xiaosu thought for a moment and said, "We don't really have anything that we can give them anyway." On the same night, the entire platoon sat down beside the campfire at the entrance of the outpost. With the aroma of the roasted goat attacking their nostrils, the escapees started tearing up as they bit into the meat. These people had been starving for many days, and no one gave them any food even after they were conscripted into the military. Li Qingzheng and his soldiers were refugees who had been recruited during the expansion of the private troops and were also unable to afford meat for their past meals. He lamented, "Actually, I felt terrible when I first learned I had been assigned to the outpost. After all, this is such a nowhere place that it feels like we're being exiled. If we encounter any danger out here, we'll just end up becoming cannon fodder." Ren Xiaosu gave him a look. He didn't expect Li Qingzheng to understand their situation so well, and that he was actually just not showing it. Li Qingzheng continued to lament, "But thinking about it now, it's really quite nice if we could have meat for all of our meals. The smell of goat meat is really great. We can go out and hunt since we have guns," Ren Xiaosu suggested. "But we'll need our guns to fight against the enemy." Li Qingzheng rejected his suggestion. Ren Xiaosu analyzed, "Look, we only have a dozen guns or so. What can we do with a dozen guns when the enemy arrives?" "That really seems to be the case," Li Qingzheng replied after some thought. The students next to them realized Ren Xiaosu seemed to have a unique flair in persuading others. Li Qingzheng was gnawing on goat leg and said with a smile, "I heard that the big shots in the stronghold can have barbecue for every meal. They even prepare lemons and onions before barbecuing the meat, only cooking it to medium rare so that the original juices are retained." Although lemons were uncommon these days, everyone had heard of this type of fruit. They never ate it before, but they heard that lemons were extremely sour. Onions, on the other hand, were still commonly seen. Chen Wudi asked in a soft whisper, "Master, why do you need lemons and onions for a barbecue?" Ren Xiaosu pondered it before saying, "So that you can squirt the lemon juice or rub the onions into other people's eyes to get dibs on the meat." Chen Wudi was confused. The people around him looked over with expressionless faces. Li Qingzheng said, sounding rather surprised, "Are you serious?" But all of a sudden, Li Qingzheng noticed the light from a vehicle heading up the mountain. He stood up immediately. Why would anyone come to this remote place at this hour of the night? A lone off-road vehicle was approaching them. Venturing out in this current wilderness with so few people was usually not too confidence-inspiring. Under normal circumstances, most people would choose to travel in convoys. So the appearance of this lone off-road vehicle made the situation seem even stranger. Everyone at the outpost stood at the entrance. Li Qingzheng and other soldiers who were issued with guns were even carrying them on their backs. When the off-road vehicle arrived at the entrance of the outpost, the dazzling headlights of the vehicle shone directly in the faces of Ren Xiaosu and the others. It was as though they did not care about how they felt. When two people jumped out of the vehicle, Ren Xiaosu saw they were both wearing the Li Consortium's military uniforms. But from the looks of it, the fabric was much more exquisite than the ones he had come across in the past. No. Actually, he had seen it once before. The commander of the combat brigade was dressed just like the two of them. But when Li Qingzheng saw the colonel epaulets on their shoulders, he saluted. "Sirs, we welcome you to our outpost for inspection." The two officers had fair complexions and looked dignified. When they stepped onto the snow in their leather boots, they made crunching sounds. They were even wearing black leather gloves. However, the two men looked exceptionally young. When one of them saw the roasted goat, he said with a smile, "I didn't expect you all to be enjoying this so much." After inspecting several dozen outposts, we noticed all of them were having difficulties just getting by. It's only you guys here who are living so comfortably. Bring 2 chairs over for us." After he said that, he walked into the outpost with the other officer. Li Qingzheng got someone to bring out 2 chairs for these 2 officers while he prepared to sit on the ground. But just as his buttocks touched the ground, that officer suddenly frowned and said, "Did we say you could sit? Stand to the side." He took off his gloves and started cutting some meat from the goat. After taking a bite, he frowned and said, "You didn't even season it properly. This tastes horrible." Tui. Ren Xiaosu watched this guy spit out the meat in his mouth along with some saliva onto the roasted goat. How were the rest of them supposed to eat it now? But his first reaction was to stop Chen Wudi. Ren Xiaosu whispered, "Don't be rash. I'll kill them later when no one is around." With the illumination of the campfire, Ren Xiaosu suddenly saw a silvery gleam underneath the officer's eyes. He thought they might have something to fall back on. Why else would the two of them venture out this late at night? It didn't even seem like they had brought any heavy weapons with them. The two officers wiped their hands on the snow and put their leather gloves back on. The lead officer said calmly, "Keep a careful watch at the outpost. If you see any enemies approaching, remember to report it immediately. If there is any delay, all of you will be brought in for a court-martial. There can only be one outcome then, execution." Li Qingzheng bowed slightly as he nodded and said, "Yes, yes, we'll keep a careful watch here at the outpost." As the two men spoke, they got back into the vehicle. With a roar, the vehicle moved off and left behind deep tracks in the snow with its snow chains. The two of them had trashed the originally good mood everyone was in. Someone asked, "Are we going to let them leave just like that?" Li Qingzheng could only helplessly wave it off. "Put out the fire and go to bed. What else can we do if we don't let them leave? Just blame it on our shitty lives. They're family members of the Li Consortium, after all." "What about the goat?" someone asked. "We can still eat it after cutting off the parts they spat on," Li Qingzheng replied. As refugees, they had had a certain submissiveness hammered into their characters. So what if they were angry and feeling wronged? Life would still go on. He then walked into his house. Ren Xiaosu looked at the others and said, "Y'all can go to sleep first. We'll tidy up the place." By we, he was referring to their smaller group consisting of himself, Chen Wudi, and the students, which they themselves were fully aware of. But since the students were always diligent at doing their work, no one thought anything of it. When everyone else returned to their houses to rest, Ren Xiaosu said, "Y'all take your time to tidy up. I'll head out for a while." When the students heard that, their eyes lit up. "Good on you, Monitor." The off-road vehicle was moving slowly along the mountain road. Even though the vehicle was equipped with snow chains, they could not drive too fast in the snow, especially not when they were driving downhill. Jazz music was playing inside the vehicle while the officer in the front seat chuckled as he put in another cassette. You can really feel the control the Li Consortium has over these lands when you see the fear in those people's eyes. It's really quite interesting to see them angry but not dare to show it. After we get back this time, we should be able to step up for the second stage of synchronization. By then, even more nanomachines can be injected into our bodies. Apparently, a family member of the Li Consortium in Stronghold 107 has already gone on to the second stage of the process. There's no hurry. We're only just beginning. The family members of the organization were all outstanding and intelligent. They received the best education and understood the truest face of the world. If all the roads in the world led to Rome, they would be born in Rome. But since the Li Consortium could even produce a demon like Li Shenton, they could create even more of such demons. The only difference was that one of them was lonely while the others were not. During their conversation, something suddenly dropped down from above. They looked astounded but managed to react quickly enough to open the door and jump out at the same time. With a loud bang, the shadow clone landed on the off-road vehicle from above and smashed right through the middle. The sparks from the black saber cutting through the vehicle were extraordinarily striking in the darkness. Ren Xiaosu watched this scene quietly from the hillside. But to his surprise, the reactions of the two officers were much quicker than he expected. Furthermore, they should be showing signs of fractures and other injuries after jumping out of the vehicle into the hilly terrain. However, they were unscathed. The two officers got up from the ground and dusted off the snow on their bodies. One of them sneered, "Could it be someone from the outpost?" They were not stupid. Anyone who would attack them in a place like this would definitely have to be from the outpost. But they could never have expected there to actually be a supernatural being posted to that shabby outpost back there. As an officer took off his gloves, he could feel a silver torrent gushing through his veins. The new nanoforms followed his will and gathered within his body until even his blood turned silver. "You're the first supernatural being to face our newfound strength, so you should feel honored." His voice stopped abruptly. He only had enough time to see the black shadow clone suddenly disappear from above the vehicle before a menacing hand grasped him by the neck. With a slight twist, his neck was broken. Ren Xiaosu found it a shame that Luolan was not here to see this. Didn't he tell him to not believe in superstitions? When the shadow clone disappeared from sight again, the other officer turned around and tried to escape into the wilderness. However, he was immediately chased down by the shadow clone from behind. The shadow clone punched the spine of its opponent, making a cracking sound. Ren Xiaosu felt some sort of special energy surrounding the spine that was trying to disperse the weight of the punch with an intense, regular motion. However, the strength of the shadow clone was simply too great. Before the opponent could build up his defense, it had already started to break apart. Ren Xiaosu slowly made his way out of the forest. He had noticed a lake on the hillside that was suitable for discarding the corpses and vehicle in. It was just that it would be a bit tough on the shadow clone to carry the vehicle over. After all, it did weigh more than a ton. Ren Xiaosu did not use his saber throughout the battle because he was worried about leaving bloodstains behind. In the end, his opponents turned out to be surprisingly vulnerable. At the beginning, the arrogance of these two people made Ren Xiaosu very cautious of them. He did not expect that his punches would be so strong against them. Just like his encounter with Midnight back then, he had planned on giving it his all in an earth-shattering battle. But before he could even get to that point, his opponents had already been killed. With the outcome like this, it seemed like he had gotten all stoked for nothing. But a moment later, Ren Xiaosu saw a silvery glow seeping out from under the skin of the two bodies. It was as though it was being guided by his will. Ren Xiaosu was surprised to discover that he seemed to be able to control them. He had always been cautious about the unknown. If I end up using it after saying to not believe in superstitions, would that be a little hypocritical? Ren Xiaosu was in a dilemma. During the physical examination at the military base, he discovered that the nanomachines were trying to interface with his neurons via an external controller. But now that no one was controlling them, he realized he had natural control over these things. Nanomachines did not have a mind of their own and were only machines. In the early days, nanomachines could not be put into military use because they were too small to be loaded in with overly complex instructions. After gaining a breakthrough in neurotech, the human brain ended up becoming a processor, while the nanomachines were just an execution terminal. To put it simply, they were purely tools to be used. But nanomachines needed to be paired with a specific DNA sequence before they could be used. Each person's DNA was just like a unique password that could only be used to pair with their own nanomachines. The nanomachines would determine whether they were in an operable state via an authorization process. The paired nanomachines were a safe locked with a password. Without the password, they would stop working and refuse any unfamiliar consciousness from trying to access them. Therefore, the two officers were unable to control each other's nanomachines, and neither could anyone else access theirs. But when Ren Xiaosu's willpower tried to initiate contact with the nanomachines, he detected them to be in an idle state. It was as though there were some sort of a barrier denying him from syncing with those nanomachines. But after his willpower swept over them, the typewriter in the palace suddenly typed several lines of small words. Reloading system. Resetting to factory settings. Reinstalling applications. Pairing successful. After that, Ren Xiaosu found he had actually taken control of these little machines. The silvery river started flowing towards him across the surface of the snow. They moved up along his legs and finally gathered in his hands. The nanomachines extracted from these two officers combined only amounted to the size of a fist. It was no wonder they were so weak. So it turned out they had this few nanomachines inside their bodies? After the nanomachines lost their owners, their ports reopened to wait for a new pairing. Under normal circumstances, they should have been sent back to the factory to be paired again. However, the palace had bypassed all of those steps and helped Ren Xiaosu interface with these nanomachines. If the ports had not been reopened, the palace could not have proceeded with the pairing process. The silvery, liquid metal ball cycled through various strange forms within Ren Xiaosu's palm. Then it turned into a metallic gauntlet that wrapped around Ren Xiaosu's hand. After interfacing with Ren Xiaosu's neurons, they became just like a part of his body and did not make him feel uncomfortable at all. When he threw a punch at the body of the off-road vehicle, he watched the steel body creak and then collapse. Meanwhile, the nanogauntlet on Ren Xiaosu's hand did not seem damaged at all. When Luolan mentioned the nanomachines, Ren Xiaosu disdained them greatly. But now his opinion had changed a little. If he could create body armor with the nanomachines, did it mean he wouldn't have to use the shadow clone to shield himself from bullets? After all, that method was still rather painful for him. Of course, it had only changed his opinion a little for now. As for whether it would really prove to be useful, Ren Xiaosu felt that he would only find out after extracting more nanomachines from the other members of the Li Consortium. Someone would surely come and investigate after 2 elite members of the Li Consortium disappeared while they were out on inspection. Ren Xiaosu wondered if those who came to investigate would also have nanomachines in them. Ren Xiaosu ordered the shadow clone to place the 2 corpses in the vehicle and carry it to the location of the lake as per his memory. He had to be extremely careful when it came to dumping these corpses since he still needed more people with nanomachines to come out here in the future. When he killed them, he did not use the saber as he was afraid of leaving behind any traces of blood. Right now, he was being even more careful for fear of leaving behind any evidence. As Ren Xiaosu led his shadow clone forward, he asked, "Old Su, do you think the amount of nanomachines in the body varies from person to person? Since the synchronization rate goes from low to high, there must be a difference in the amount of nanomachines one can control, right? Do you think that the next group of people to arrive will be even stronger? That would be good. Who knows, they might have even more nanomachines in their bodies. Aren't you being a little shy? Why aren't you talking? People always said that small details make a big difference." So, in order not to expose his own identity, Ren Xiaosu decided to name his shadow clone Old Su. Before Ren Xiaosu threw the vehicle into the lake, he removed the 2 officers' uniforms and put them away in his storage space. Who knew if they would be of any use later? These were the Li Consortium's colonel uniforms, after all. After he filled the vehicle with stones and threw it into the lake, he returned to the outpost. When the students saw him coming back, they went up to him and asked, "Monitor, how'd it go?" "It's been taken care of," Ren Xiaosu answered simply and comprehensively. "Go back to sleep. We still have to get up early tomorrow." At this moment, Ren Xiaosu noticed the Wolf King standing on the summit of the mountain way in the distance. He thought for a while before heading out into the mountains. In reality, Ren Xiaosu also did not know why he was so eager to interact with the Wolf King. As he walked on the mountain path, he suddenly felt it was sometimes easier to get along with the wolves than with people. Before Ren Xiaosu could get far, he saw the Wolf King slowly coming down from the mountain ridge. He had planned on chatting with the Wolf King, but he did not know what to say after he saw it. As the Wolf King looked calmly at him, Ren Xiaosu thought about how it was still chasing him all over the wilderness just 1.5 years ago. He suddenly remembered the student who mentioned giving the wolves something in return for their favor. Ren Xiaosu opened his mouth and broke the deadlock. He said, Since you gave me a rabbit and a goat, shouldn't I also give you something in return?" The Wolf King did not say anything, but Ren Xiaosu could feel it relaxing its muscles slowly. This meant the Wolf King was also putting down its guard. When Ren Xiaosu saw no response, he prodded, "Since you can't speak, why don't I let you choose from a few gifts that I have? Look at you, you're always running around by yourself in the mountains. I can understand that a king is always lonely, so why don't I present you the Lord of Wolves of Mount Kun? He can chat with you since both of you are considered kings of the wolves." Who knows, you two might have something in common. For some reason, Ren Xiaosu felt the Wolf King understood him. Because, when he mentioned the Lord of Wolves of Mount Kun, the Wolf King immediately gave a look of disdain. Ren Xiaosu wondered how the Wolf King was even able to make such an expression. Ren Xiaosu put away the gun. A man and a wolf were sitting next to each other on this mountain path with the moonlight shining down upon them. It was an atmosphere that could only be described as exceptionally harmonious. Do you want this? Ren Xiaosu took out a bottle of antibiotics old Wang gave him before they parted ways. Although he did not fall sick as often now, he could use it to save the students in case they fell ill. However, the Wolf King still did not respond. Ren Xiaosu pulled out a dazzling array of items like a hammer, shovel, pot, etc., but the Wolf King still remained unmoved. Ren Xiaosu sighed, if you are gonna be so picky, I won't be able to return your favor. Wait a minute. He still had one item he didn't take out. At this moment, Ren Xiaosu brought out a vial of black medicine from his storage space. Do you want this? When Ren Xiaosu said this, he did not hold any high hopes while pulling the stopper off the vial. But when the Wolf King sniffed and caught a whiff of the smell in the air, it suddenly nodded to Ren Xiaosu. Ren Xiaosu was momentarily taken aback as he did not expect the Wolf King to really understand human language. He threw the vial over and the Wolf King picked it up with its mouth as it got up. Ren Xiaosu could finally let out a sigh of relief. It looked like they were not going to be lacking any meat from now on. I never expected that you'd need something like this while in the prime of your life. When the Wolf King heard that, it looked a little confused. It didn't seem like it realized what Ren Xiaosu had just given it. It was just that there was an inexplicably attractive smell emanating from the vial into the air. It was not the smell of the medicine that attracted it, but a smell of mystery that originated from the palace. Then the man and the wolf parted ways. After a brief exchange, Ren Xiaosu felt that his relationship with the Wolf King had become a little closer. At the very least, they were now trading partners or something like that. As long as they were not enemies, anything was fine. In the wee hours of the same night, everyone at the outpost was jolted awake by the noisy howling of the wolves. Everyone put on their clothes as they walked out of their houses and looked towards the mountains. They could not tell where the howling was coming from. Li Qingzheng was wearing a military overcoat and wondered, what's the matter with those wolves in the middle of the night? They've been howling for over an hour already. Are they out on a hunt? Ren Xiaosu felt a little guilty. They probably are. Who knows? Could they be gathering their allies to attack the outpost? Someone wondered. That's unlikely. They wouldn't need to gather their allies to attack our outpost. We'll all be dead if just a few hundred of them came to attack us, someone said. Aren't we putting ourselves down too much by saying that? A soldier said. Ren Xiaosu said in seriousness, that's what you call self-awareness. However, Ren Xiaosu felt a little guilty because he suspected it might have something to do with the black medicine he had given the Wolf King that caused the wolves to behave so abnormally. For the next 2 days, the Wolf King did not send any additional game from their hunts to the outpost. After they cut off the dirted part of the roasted goat, Li Qingzheng and the others continued eating it with relish. However, Ren Xiaosu did not have any appetite for it anymore. It was not a matter of whether the meat was dirted or not, but in Ren Xiaosu's opinion, that spit represented an insult from the high and mighty family members of the organization. But of course, it was mainly because he was not hungry. Li Qingzheng lamented as he sat at the edge of the campfire and looked at what remained of the goat. I wonder what happened to the wolves. Why aren't they sending us food anymore? They're probably exhausted. Ren Xiaosu sighed. He was thinking about if he should have clearly explained the effects of the medicine to the Wolf King. After all, there was quite a difference between using it externally and internally. Seeing how the Wolf King did not send them any more game after taking the medicine, could it bear a grudge against him now? But when Ren Xiaosu was sleeping that night, he suddenly heard something that sounded like goods being unloaded coming from outside the house. When Ren Xiaosu looked out the window, he saw the wolves dumping several goats, boars, pheasants, and whatnot on the ground. It was quite a selection of different wild animals. Just looking at the quantity, they not only made up for not bringing any game over for the past 2 days, but they also brought a lot more than that. After the wolves left, everyone at the outpost was in shock. A soldier looked at Li Qingzheng and said, "Are you really the Lord of Wolves?" Even Li Qingzheng was also shocked at this. Could I really be the Lord of Wolves of Mount Kun? Those who did not know the truth felt a sense of respect for Li Qingzheng. But the students who knew better all looked at Ren Xiaosu with complicated expressions on their faces. A student asked, "Monitor, how did you manage to do that?" "The Wolf King probably knows that my master is ill, so it decided to send over more game for his recuperation," Chen Wudi said with a sigh. "There's nothing wrong with my brain," Ren Xiaosu snapped at him. He reckoned the Wolf King had sent over all this game mainly because it wanted to thank him. He could have never expected that the Wolf King had an underlying condition. At this moment, someone said, "How long will it take for us to finish eating all this?" "Fortunately for us, it's winter now, so we can store them for a longer time. But we can't just leave it there like that. Why don't we make it into cured meat?" Ren Xiaosu sighed and said, "If we make it into cured meat, it wouldn't even be a problem to keep them until the start of spring." The group started busily skinning and cutting up the meat. However, they did not have enough salt to start curing the meat, nor were there any seasonings and spices. Cured meat was usually made by cutting the meat into strips before rubbing the surface with salt and drying it. There wasn't a need to worry about wasting salt, since the salt needed by the human body would be present in the cured meat. By eating it, it would be as good as replenishing the body's salt content. Ren Xiaosu said, "In another 2 days, we can trade for some salt and seasonings with the meat we have during the supply run. We won't be able to finish this much meat anyway." "Don't do that," Li Qingzheng said softly, "You'll suffer a huge loss if you barter with those ruffians. We might as well sell them in town. Not only can we buy more salt that way, but we can also earn quite a bit of money. We can then afford to buy more things so that it won't get too miserable in the mountains during winter." Ren Xiaosu looked at Li Qingzheng, who seemed to be very familiar with the private troops' behavior. He heard Li Qingzheng say, "We'll sneak back to town in another 2 days. Don't you still have some friends in town? We can bring some of the cured meat to them. It can be a little difficult to get by winter without having some meat to eat." "Sure." Ren Xiaosu nodded in response. This would also be his chance to go back to town to visit Yan Liuyuan and the others. If they'd encountered any difficulties, Ren Xiaosu would be able to help them to resolve them as well. Everyone was working outside in the open ground in front of the outpost. Li Qingzheng weighed the fleshy meat in his hand and said with a sigh, "This feels more blissful than the days I spent in town." "Master, what does blissful mean?" Chen Wudi asked Ren Xiaosu. Li Qingzheng was amused. "Wouldn't having meat to eat already count as blissful?" Ren Xiaosu gave Li Qingzheng a look and said softly to Chen Wudi, "Everyone's definition of bliss is different. Are you happy when you're subduing demons and monsters?" "Yes, I am," Chen Wudi said. "Well then, that's what bliss means to you," Ren Xiaosu said. "I get it." Ren Xiaosu looked at him as he rubbed the salt onto the meat. "Wouldn't the Li Consortium's forces do something if you try that?" "I'll sell them secretly," Li Qingzheng said with a chuckle. Ren Xiaosu asked, "Are you familiar with any of the shops?" "No," Li Qingzheng said, "but since meat is quite scarce, I think it should be easy to sell." Ren Xiaosu sighed, "Have you ever eaten meat during the Lunar New Year before? Everyone just makes do with some lard in their cooking and considers that a New Year celebration. The meat will only be valuable if you can sell them in the stronghold. I'll introduce you to a friend of mine. He's called Wang Fugui, and it won't be difficult to get to know some people in the stronghold with his skills." Li Qingzhen's eyes lit up. Really? He also knew what Ren Xiaosu said was true. All of a sudden, this outpost had become a wholesale market for meat. However, the town's purchasing power was too low for them to make much of a profit, and they might not be able to sell the meat off easily unless he was willing to reduce the price. Therefore, it was extremely important to have a qualified distributor. Meanwhile, Ren Xiaosu still needed to stay undercover in this outpost and wait for more opportunities to get more nanomachines, so he needed Li Qingzheng to front the dealings. By acting as the intermediary between Li Qingzheng and Wang Fugui, he could travel frequently between the outpost and town. Moreover, they would also be able to rake in the majority of the profits. Old Wang was still quite capable in this aspect. But at this moment, Li Qingzheng felt a little puzzled. "Aren't you a student from the stronghold? How did you know about life in town?" Ren Xiaosu glanced at him and said, "I'm a refugee too." When it came to the day for the supplies to be delivered, Li Qingzheng instructed everyone to hide the cured meat and everything else in case the ruffians delivering the supplies got any ideas. "We must hide everything. If not, those bastards will for sure seize a lot of the meat when they see them." The truck carrying the goods and supplies came up via the mountain road. But they only unloaded a bag of rice and a bag of noodles without giving them any salt. Li Qingzheng was stunned. He asked, "What about the salt? You're already very fortunate to have rice and noodles." The two soldiers said as they smoked their cigarettes, "Hurry up and sign for it. Otherwise, you won't even get rice and noodles. You should at least give us some salt," Li Qingzheng said after hesitating for a moment. "Do you want it or not? If you don't, we'll bring it back with us," said one of the soldiers delivering the supplies. Li Qingzheng said through his teeth, "Yes, I want it." "You're still so picky, hey? Do you know how many refugees don't even get to eat?" After he said that, they got back into the truck and left. Li Qingzheng did not dare say anything else in front of them. After the truck left, he cursed out loud, "Those bastards must have embezzled our provisions for themselves. Are they trying to force us to dig for wild vegetables in the mountains to pair with rice and noodles?" When they opened up the bags of rice and noodles, they were shocked to discover that sand had been mixed into them. "They are not treating us as people," someone said indignantly. Ren Xiaosu sighed to the students, "This is the world that y'all have never come into contact with before." Just after the resupply truck departed, another military transport truck drove up from the bottom of the mountain. Everyone watched quietly as they waited for the vehicle to arrive without knowing what they were here for. When they saw a platoon with loaded guns getting out of the truck, everyone realized this was probably the combat troops of the Li Consortium. Li Qingzheng calmed himself down and put on a placating smile. "Sirs, may I know the purpose of you coming to our outpost?" The officer in charge sneered, "Did anyone come by to inspect the outpost a few days ago?" When Ren Xiaosu heard this, he was thrilled. He had been waiting for the past few days for these people to come and investigate the incident, and they had finally arrived. At first, he wondered if he could bait a few more people who had these nanomachines to come to the outpost through this incident. But he never expected that they were not stupid either, as they sent over a full-strength platoon. Of course, this was reasonable. After all, 2 elite members of the organization had mysteriously gone missing, so they would definitely have to take extra precautions. Ren Xiaosu felt that this officer would probably be carrying nanomachines as well, but he could not possibly take such a big risk as attacking them now. Li Qingzheng explained, "Yes, they've been here. The 2 of them were very young officers, but they just stayed for 10 minutes before leaving." "Is that so?" The officer paced around the front of the outpost when he suddenly asked, "I can smell the scent of blood. Did a battle break out here?" Everyone was stunned as they did not expect this guy to have such a keen nose. After all, several days had passed since they had skinned and cut up the meat. The scent of blood should have already dissipated from around here. Immediately, all the soldiers behind the officer cocked their weapons and pointed them at Ren Xiaosu and the others. Li Qingzheng quickly put on a placating smile and said, "We hunted some game with our guns, and we haven't had the time to take the cured meat we preserved out to dry." Then Li Qingzheng hurriedly went to open the kitchen door and revealed the cured meat on the kitchen stove. The officer raised his eyebrows and said, "It's no wonder there's the gamey smell of goat in the air." Then the officer said, "Search the outpost." 5 soldiers stayed behind while the rest swarmed into the houses to conduct a search. Ren Xiaosu and the others did not dare move. After a while, the soldiers trickled back to report, "We found nothing out of the ordinary." The officer said coldly, "It's just a routine inspection. Please do not mind, my fellow colleagues." Actually, he did not feel that anything was off with this outpost. Hunting was also common at several of the other outposts, except they did not have as abundant a harvest as here. He was mainly concerned with finding the vehicle, corpses, and belongings of the 2 officers. After all, it would not be easy to hide the vehicle after killing them. If anyone coveted the belongings of the 2 missing officers, they would surely leave behind some clues. As he had not found any signs of a battle taking place or an abandoned vehicle on the road, he had already lowered his guard. Based on the 2 officers' patrol route and schedule, they should have been in the vicinity of these few outposts located nearby when something happened to them. However, the officer in charge of the search did not find anything unusual here. While he questioned the outpost's soldiers one by one, someone would make detailed notes next to him. During the questioning, he did not even notice any unusual behavior from anyone. After questioning for a long time, he found that the people here were either obedient students who had escaped from a disaster or former refugees and hooligans. They did not even have enough sets of uniforms and weapons, so how could they possibly kill 2 elite soldiers? The officer said coldly, "Let's head to the next outpost." He decided to have a look nearby at the other outposts first. Ren Xiaosu felt a little sorry when he saw this great harvest of nanomachines leaving. However, he knew the investigation would not end so easily. They would definitely come back with a more rigorous investigation, especially when the 2 people who had died were the family members of the organization. But as the military transport truck started driving down the mountain, everyone saw some wolves lurking in the forest. It seemed like the wolves were planning on following the truck. Ren Xiaosu was taken aback. Were the wolves planning to kill the Li Consortium's combat troops? But at this moment, he remembered the reason he managed to acquire the first gun in his life some time ago was because the wolves had attacked the factory outside town, as well as Stronghold 113's private troops. Ren Xiaosu had already known there was a long-standing feud between the wolves and Stronghold 113's private troops. But he never expected the wolves would actually seek to attack the Li Consortium's combat troops as well. It seemed like the soldiers in the truck driving slowly down the mountain did not realize danger was approaching. Even though Li Qingzheng and the others saw the wolves, none of them dared to act rashly. On one hand, they were worried the wolves would wipe out everyone at their outpost. But on the other hand, since the Lord of Wolves of Mount Kun had not said anything yet, they did not know what to do either. Li Qingzheng said, "It's none of our business and there's nothing much we can do about it anyway, so let's just pretend that we never saw anything." Seeing that the wolves did not seem to be interested in their outpost, Li Qingzheng decided to bury his head in the sand. The soldiers of the Li Consortium had never treated them nicely before anyway, so why care about their lives? Li Qingzheng sent everyone back into their houses. "Stop watching. This pack of wolves might be just coming out for a stroll." Then Li Qingzheng went back to his house first and shivered in fear while holding his automatic rifle close to him. With so many wolves out there, it would be too easy for them to wipe out the outpost. He suddenly felt that it couldn't be more stimulating than to have been deployed to this outpost. They could eat meat with their meals every day, yet had to live in constant fear as well. Who knew when it would be before the wolves came to attack them and carry them away in their mouths? Ren Xiaosu also pretended to be afraid as he walked back to his house. But taking a sweeping glance, he realized there were not as many wolves as he had thought. It looked like only a portion of them were roaming around now. Back in the house, Ren Xiaosu said to Chen Wudi, Woody, watch over everyone for me. Don't let anyone into the house before I get back. If anything unexpected happens, just say that I have diarrhea and needed to go to the toilet. As a result of their smaller group of 10, 1/3 of the entire platoon at the outpost were their people. Therefore, all of them had been grouped together when they were assigned their living quarters. This was also what Ren Xiaosu fought for at the beginning, because it would be more convenient for him to go out on his own with this arrangement, and it would only work if he was surrounded by people he could trust. The students were already used to this since their class monitor was always able to take care of himself anyway. Although Li Qingzheng kept proclaiming himself the Lord of Wolves of Mount Kun, Ren Xiaosu was actually the true Lord of Wolves to them. Ren Xiaosu jumped out the window and ran all the way to the foot of the mountain. He did not have a specific purpose and just wanted to see how things would turn out. Along the way, he would also try to get his hands on some nanomachines. In a world like this, Ren Xiaosu was interested in anything that could enhance his strength further. Who cared if they were superstitions? After acquiring some nanomachines, Ren Xiaosu could not help but summon them for testing while performing his sentry duty alone atop the mountain. In the process, Ren Xiaosu discovered that even if he did not let the nanomachines enter his body to strengthen his muscles and skeletal structure, they were still powerful enough to be used as an external suit of armor. Perhaps he could really achieve a state of invulnerability when this suit of armor covered his entire body. What were the things that supernatural beings were most afraid of at the start? It was not the threat of other supernatural beings, but the individual firearms currently in the possession of human civilization. No matter how powerful supernatural beings were, they would still die after getting shot a few times. The soldiers in the military transport truck were chatting happily as the truck made its way down the mountain. Since the officer was not sitting with them in the back, they started talking without restraint. "I'll be returning to the stronghold next week for my shift off of leave. I wonder if the mistress I keep misses me yet," a soldier laughed as he leaned against the wall of the compartment. Although life as a private army soldier was very miserable, the Li Consortium's combat troops had always been treated very well. The Li Consortium's combat troops lived in the stronghold while they were not on duty. When the members of the Public Order Division and private troops saw them, they would always detour around them. However, discipline within the organization had always been upheld very strictly, and they were forbidden from disturbing others. Debauchery is forbidden in the military. "You should be careful not to let anyone know about her," one of the soldiers reminded him. "What's there to be afraid of?" The soldier said disdainfully, "Even the Li Consortium's officers themselves don't refrain from doing that, so as if they would care about such things." In any organization, the higher UPS would set the example for their subordinates to follow. If the higher UPS were religious, the subordinates would also have to be religious. Even if they did not believe in it, they would have to pretend like they did. If the higher UPS behaved themselves, the subordinates would also conduct themselves with restraint. With a large number of the Li Consortium's residents conscripted into the army, an extravagant and impetuous air had spread through the ranks of the Li Consortium's combat troops over the past 2 years. Ultimately, the Li Consortium had expanded its strength too quickly as the foundation was not yet properly established. As the group chatted, they did not notice the approaching danger. However, the wolves did not choose to attack immediately as they just followed the truck quietly in the wilderness. Only Ren Xiaosu knew that wolves were one of the most patient species among the animals in the wilderness. As the wolves followed the Li Consortium's combat troops, Ren Xiaosu tracked the wolves. They kept moving slowly for dozens of kilometers until the Li Consortium's platoon arrived at the next outpost. At this moment, the wolves suddenly launched an attack as fast as lightning just as the military transport truck entered the outpost. Ren Xiaosu silently observed from a distance as the Li Consortium's combat troops responded rapidly. In a mere 3 seconds, they had already formed an effective defensive formation. The entire outpost was filled with loud gunshots while the private troops at the outpost were dumbfounded. They had no inkling of what was going on. This time, Ren Xiaosu was watching the entire attack by the wolves as an onlooker. During the shootout, some of the wolves acted as the advance party to draw the opponent's firepower onto them while making high-speed movements to avoid getting shot. Simultaneously, some of the other wolves had circled around and arrived at the rear of the Li Consortium's combat troops while everyone was distracted. During this time, the Wolf King discovered Ren Xiaosu's presence on multiple occasions. But it did not seem bothered by him as it continued its hunt. Under normal circumstances, the wolves would give up hunting as a precaution upon encountering any external interference. The Li Consortium's combat troops were only here because they had to investigate the disappearance of the two officers and had not expected such a fierce battle to break out. Although they were very combat-oriented, the wolves had an overwhelming advantage over them in terms of strength and numbers. Furthermore, Ren Xiaosu was not surprised to see that the wolves were able to quickly recover after getting shot. Their physical fitness was simply too good. All of a sudden, the Wolf King bit into the officer's waist from behind. Right after, it swung its head violently and sent the officer flying like a rag doll. Even for a wild animal as strong as the Wolf King, it still resorted to sneak attacks as a tactical priority. There was no fairness to speak of in any battles in this world. The result was the only thing that mattered. Ren Xiaosu could not help but call out, "Hey! I have something to say, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate." The Wolf King was a little puzzled as it turned around and looked at him. Ren Xiaosu pointed to another wolf who now had the officer dangling from its mouth and took out a vial of black medicine. "Let's trade." With a look from the Wolf King, that wolf immediately placed the officer in its mouth down. That officer still had a few breaths left as the injuries he suffered were not lethal. However, he was already on the verge of death. When he saw Ren Xiaosu, he was shocked. He did not expect this young man to appear here, nor did he expect Ren Xiaosu to be making deals with the wolves. Ren Xiaosu wondered if he had betrayed humanity by making deals with these killer wolves. After slaughtering the entire outpost, the wolves reorganized themselves on the spot. They picked up the corpses from the ground with their mouths and prepared to head back into the mountains. The wolves did not stay around any longer. Ren Xiaosu saw the white fur on several wolves stained red with blood, and it seemed like they urgently needed to go back to deal with their injuries. After the wolves left, Ren Xiaosu squatted down beside the officer. "Gonna ask you something. How do you usually recharge the nanomachines?" Ren Xiaosu had already operated the nanomachines multiple times. But in the process of operating them, Ren Xiaosu realized the energy source of the nanomachines was completely dependent on the bioenergy of the human body. However, the disadvantage was that the nanomachines needed to be recharged in the body for a very long time after each usage. However, the subsequent usage duration would not last for long. So Ren Xiaosu felt that the Li Consortium's nanomachines still had some flaws after he gained a better understanding of them. If they could not solve the energy source issue, these nanomachines would likely be of little value when encountering a high-intensity fight on a real battlefield. Of course, Ren Xiaosu speculated that there had to be other methods within the inner circle of the Li Consortium's forces to quickly recharge these nanomachines. Wait. Right now, it seemed like Qing Zhen was the one who had researched the most on the subject of energy. After all, nuclear power was one of the most efficient energy sources in the world. The officer paled, but he remained tight-lipped. Ren Xiaosu said, "Look, your injury isn't fatal. Who knows, you might still be saved if you answer my question. If you let me go back, do you think you can survive?" The officer clenched his teeth and sneered, "Would you dare let me go?" Ren Xiaosu said, "Goading doesn't work on me." He realized this Li Consortium officer was quite unyielding and very different from the private troops he knew. Ren Xiaosu said, "It's too slow to use bioenergy to recharge the nanomachines. Y'all should have some sort of special charging method, right? How else could you sustain yourselves in high-intensity battles?" The officer closed his eyes and refused to say anything. "You were probably running out of power by the end of the battle, right?" Ren Xiaosu said slowly, "You were only able to fight for about 10 minutes or so, but how could there be such quick battles on the real battlefield? At this moment, the soldier opened his eyes in surprise and said, "Why are you so interested in the nanomachines? And you even know so much? You're just an ordinary soldier in the private army." At this moment, he realized that something was off. He even suspected that Ren Xiaosu had nanomachines in him. Wait a minute, they had indeed lost some nanomachines, and it was that very batch of nanomachines that the two missing officers were carrying that they were currently investigating. But how could this be? Regardless of whether this young man in front of him could kill two elite soldiers with nanomachines in them, even if he could, their nanomachines would have to be sent back to headquarters for unlocking before they could be paired once again. Hence, the young man in front of him could not possibly use the nanomachines even if he had acquired them. But why? Why did he keep thinking something was wrong? He was really hoping to report this back to the General Staff One, but he did not have the chance to do so. "Don't expect me to breach confidentiality," the officer struggled to say. Ren Xiaosu sighed. "Forget it, I'll respect you as a brave person." He realized he still could not underestimate the combat troops of the organizations. It wasn't only the Qing Consortium's combat troops that were powerful, but every organization in the world had to rely on them as well. Without a strong military, those organizations would not be able to tower over these wastelands. After Ren Xiaosu waited for the officer to take his last breath, he quietly watched as the silvery liquid in the officer's body started seeping out through his skin. He was pretty familiar with this process and waited patiently for the palace to restore the batch of nanomachines to their factory settings and execute a series of other operations. The harvest was not exactly a lot this time. After all, it was only one person carrying the nanomachines, so the amount only equated to half of what he had acquired previously. The gauntlet still remained a gauntlet without much change to it. However, Ren Xiaosu was not in too much of a hurry now. After all, there still had to be a lot more officers with nanomachines within the ranks of the Li Consortium's combat troops he could slowly farm. Ren Xiaosu got an idea. Since he could reset the nanomachines with the help of the palace, did that mean he could share some of them with the students if he had excess nanomachines in the future? Chen Wudi would certainly not require these machines. To be honest, Ren Xiaosu could not figure out exactly how strong Chen Wudi was. If he really fought him at his full strength, it was difficult to say if he could even defeat his disciple. However, Ren Xiaosu wasn't too bothered by this. After all, the master in Journey to the West was also no match for his disciple. When he thought of this, he felt much better. Ren Xiaosu manipulated the shadow clone to carry the officer's corpse and was ready to sink it into the lake as well. After all, he could not just leave the corpse lying in the wilderness. There wouldn't be a way to explain why the wolves chose to take everyone away except for the officer. Furthermore, if those who came to investigate the incident discovered that the nanomachines in this officer's body had disappeared, that would pose a humongous problem for him. No matter what, Ren Xiaosu was not willing to risk the Li Consortium finding out that he could restore the nanomachines to their factory settings. Otherwise, they would surely hunt him to the ends of the earth. An hour later, Ren Xiaosu was a little worried as he stood by the small lake in the mountain. Seeing that the lake itself was not that large, would the water level get higher if he started dumping more things into it in the future? It was late at night after he finished disposing of the corpse. But instead of rushing back to the outpost, Ren Xiaosu headed into the mountains. As there was no howling from the mountains tonight, Ren Xiaosu wanted to check on the wolves to see if they had suffered any serious injuries. Based on the known gestation period, it would take about 63 days for a female wolf to give birth after getting pregnant, which was a duration that was too fast for humans. Furthermore, no one knew if there were any changes to this natural cycle after the evolution of these wolves. He followed the tracks left behind by the wolves into the mountains. Ren Xiaosu deduced that the wolf den should not be located too far away from the outpost since the howling he heard the other night sounded like it had come from nearby. But before Ren Xiaosu could walk far, the Wolf King suddenly appeared at the end of the mountain path and blocked his way. Ren Xiaosu somehow felt that the Wolf King had also come out to look for him. When he heard the Wolf King letting out a whimper, Ren Xiaosu pondered it for a moment. Are you looking for me to help you treat the wounds of your pack mates? Animals in the wild were extremely cautious when they were hunting. That was because they could easily die from an infection caused by a small wound. Even the most powerful species would find it difficult to survive a bacterial infection. It had been proven that bacteria was one of the toughest living organisms in the world. Even after the world went through repeated cycles of destruction and rebirth, some types of bacteria still managed to survive each time. When Ren Xiaosu finished asking, the Wolf King actually nodded in response. Ren Xiaosu took out the black medicine and said, "This medicine can treat wounds. I know that some of your pack mates have gotten injured, but I can help you treat their wounds." The puzzled expression on the Wolf King seemed to be suggesting, this thing can even be used to treat wounds. Earlier, Ren Xiaosu was thinking that humans could just use their fingers to apply the medicine on their wounds, but what about wolves? Wolves usually treated their wounds by licking them. So if the wolves relied on their tongues to apply the black medicine, wouldn't there be trouble? The Wolf King seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then it turned around and led Ren Xiaosu into the mountains. When Ren Xiaosu arrived at a valley downwind, he saw dozens of wolf cubs rolling around on the grass. They were not afraid of him as they had seen him when he was escaping. Though now the number of wolf cubs had increased by quite a bit. It looked like the wolves had not been idle either along the journey. Of course, Ren Xiaosu understood. After all, the wolves had such a readily available source of food, and they couldn't read books, play cards, or do any other recreational activities. When the wolves saw that Ren Xiaosu was here, they slowly made way for him. Ren Xiaosu was terrified as he walked through the wolf pack, but he endured his fear as he continued moving forward. He was a daredevil. If it were someone else, they wouldn't have ventured so deep into a wolf den. It was not without reason that he could live such a comfortable life in town by relying on hunting. As Ren Xiaosu walked further in, he saw 7 wolves lying on the ground and gasping for their lives. The scent of blood filled the air around them. Although the bullets that passed through their muscles were not enough to cause them fatal injuries, the long-term pain and bleeding would slowly drag them into the abyss. Ren Xiaosu glanced at the Wolf King beside him and said, "I have to remove the bullets from their wounds first. It will definitely be very painful, so I'll need you to tell them not to bite me." The Wolf King swung its head in the direction of the wounded as though to say, "Hurry up." Ren Xiaosu crouched down next to a wounded male wolf and took out a pair of pliers from his storage space. He didn't have the luxury to worry about sterilization in this moment. In any case, the wolves would not understand what sterilization was. Honestly, this was his first time attempting something like this. As Ren Xiaosu used the pliers to probe the wound, he kept an eye on that wolf next to him in case it reacted to the pain and tried to bite him. But Ren Xiaosu was surprised that the wolf did not make a single sound even though it was rolling its eyes in pain. What a brave wolf! Ren Xiaosu felt a little emotional when he saw this. He located the position of the bullet with the pliers. He found the bullet in a much shallower position than he thought it would be. This meant the muscle density of these wolves was even greater than he had imagined. Ren Xiaosu threw the bullet he removed from the wound at a nearby rock, and it landed with a clink. All that was left was just to apply some black medicine to the wound. The moment Ren Xiaosu applied the black medicine to the wound, he noticed the wolf whose muscles were trembling from pain start to relax slowly. At this moment, the way the Wolf King was looking at the black medicine in Ren Xiaosu's hands changed. After Ren Xiaosu finished treating the 7 wolves, he was sweating profusely. He had also overcome his fear of wolves. Ren Xiaosu wiped his sweat away and remarked, "Remember to send us more meat after they've recovered from these injuries. We're planning to sell some of it in the stronghold and make some money so that we can enjoy the Lunar New Year. It's also time to buy some new clothes for big sisters Xiaoyu and Liaoyuan." Next to Ren Xiaosu, the Wolf King listened quietly without interrupting as both human and wolf walked out of the wolf den. Ren Xiaosu had never imagined that one day, he would pass through a wolf's den at will, especially as he regarded wolves as enemies some months ago. "All right, you don't have to see me out," Ren Xiaosu said as he walked outside. "Remember not to let them eat any spicy food, onions, ginger, garlic." Ren Xiaosu suddenly stopped mid-sentence. He stared into the snowy landscape of the wilderness and lamented being too professional. Like the wolves would eat spicy food. He had barely been a doctor for more than a few days, yet he thought he really was one now. Back at the town outside of Stronghold 113, he was the only doctor in the entire town. That somehow made it sound like he was the hope of the entire village. But as he kept performing his physician duties, he somehow turned into a vet. But the wounded wolves should eat as little goat meat as possible. "You have to listen to a doctor's advice, okay?" Ren Xiaosu then took a deep breath while looking at the Wolf King and said, "Remember to send over more of those pheasants that have green tail feathers. Those are much more delicious than goat meat." "They're delicious." The Wolf King was getting disinterested in what this chatterbox was saying. It turned around and padded back to the wolf den. While on the way back, Ren Xiaosu thought that living such a life was actually quite nice. At least it was much better than receiving cold looks from residents inside the stronghold. But when Ren Xiaosu almost reached the outpost, he suddenly heard something at the outpost that sounded off. At this time, everyone should be asleep, so why was such a strong campfire still burning? When he went over to have a look, he saw everyone sitting around the campfire and barbecuing some meat. An old man with grey hair stood out among the crowd. When the old man saw Ren Xiaosu coming back, he said with a smile, "You're Ren Xiaosu, aren't you? They told me that you were suffering from diarrhea. It looks like you were taking a really long time to clear your stomach, eh?" Ren Xiaosu's instructions to Chen Wudi earlier was to improvise if an unexpected situation arose. He could deal with it by saying that Ren Xiaosu had diarrhea or something and try his best not to say anything conflicting. From the looks of it, Chen Wudi was quite adaptable at making up excuses. Ren Xiaosu called Chen Wudi over and asked him, "How long have I had the runs?" Chen Wudi counted on his fingers. 6 hours. Ren Xiaosu was dumbfounded and did not know how to carry on the conversation. He asked Chen Wudi again, "And who is that?" Chen Wudi thought for a moment before saying, "He's the earth deity one." Ren Xiaosu felt he was very stupid to have asked Chen Wudi such a serious question. At this moment, Li Qingzheng hurried over to get Ren Xiaosu to sit down when he saw him still standing there. At the same time, Li Qingzheng whispered, "He's from the Li Consortium and is also here to investigate the disappearance of the 2 officers. We didn't mention that we saw wolves during the day, so don't bring it up." Ren Xiaosu raised his eyebrows slightly. An old man dared to come here by himself to investigate the case? One a tutelary deity of a locality and the human communities who inhabit it in Chinese folk religion. The old man smiled at Ren Xiaosu as he ate. Young people these days don't pay much attention to their health. When you all get to my age, you'll realize that having a good appetite is a blessing. You're right. Ren Xiaosu glanced at him. It was definitely not logical for him to have the runs for 6 hours. He had been mentally praising Chen Wudi for being so adaptable, but thinking about it now, it looked like he had overestimated him. If Chen Wudi said he had the runs for 6 hours, it meant the old man had already been here for 6 hours. However, this old man did not even ask him where he had gone. He just went with diarrhea as the reason, like he did not intend to delve any deeper into his disappearance from the outpost. Ren Xiaosu did not believe that someone in charge of investigating a case could overlook such a simple, common-sense problem. He felt that he was just playing the fool and feigning ignorance. "Since you're here to investigate the case, have you found any clues yet?" Ren Xiaosu said nonchalantly. "Although I'm here for the investigations, what do those missing people of the Li Consortium have anything to do with me?" The old man smiled and said, "I'm already so old, yet they still made me come out to work in such bad weather. How can they do something like that?" Ren Xiaosu scrutinized him and asked, "May I ask how old are you?" I'm 73 this year. The old man said with a smile, I haven't had the chance to introduce myself yet. Hello, everyone, my name is Hu Shuo. Everyone looked at each other as this name sounded really strange. However, Ren Xiaosu was more concerned that his surname was not Li. In this region, Ren Xiaosu paid extra attention to anyone with the surname of Li up until now. Nearly everyone Ren Xiaosu met with the surname Li were the middle and higher-ranking officers of the organization's military. The only exception was Li Qingzheng, who was the Lord of Wolves of Mount Kun. Why did you take on the case then? Ren Xiaosu asked. I didn't plan on accepting it either, Hu Shuo said with a smile while scratching his head with his pinky finger. But the Li Consortium gave the order that I would not get my pay if I didn't investigate this case, so I had no choice but to come here to handle it. But I didn't expect that I would get to eat so much exotic meat at your outpost. It's really my lucky day. Ren Xiaosu felt this matter was unlikely to be as simple as the old man had explained. For a 73-year-old man to come all the way here, how could he be a normal person? There had to be a reason for why the Li Consortium would send him over to investigate after something had happened here. But at this moment, Hu Shuo stood up and dusted off his pants. All right, I've had my fill. Ren Xiaosu suddenly asked, how many outposts have you visited today? Hu Shuo chuckled, only yours. Ren Xiaosu felt the old man might already have a clue about the situation. That was why he came here directly. In an instant, Ren Xiaosu was even contemplating whether he should quickly chase him away from here. But Hu Shuo suddenly said, well, which house can I stay in? Everyone was stumped by this question. Ren Xiaosu was still wondering if he should chase the old man away, but little did he expect that the old man was already planning on living here. Li Qingzheng, who was beside him, gave a placating smile. We'll get a house cleaned up for you immediately. There were 7 one-story houses in the outpost, and one of them was originally used as a storage space, although it was quite empty. Since Hu Shuo now intended to stay the night, Li Qingzheng, as the platoon commander, was willing to strike up a relationship with this old man he suspected of being a big shot. Most of the refugees had the instinctive thought that they could make their lives easier by rubbing elbows with the big shots in the stronghold. They blindly believed in this kind of relationship. However, this left Ren Xiaosu in a tight spot. He decided to observe the situation for the time being until he could be sure of the old man's motives. It would not be too late to decide what to do then. Ren Xiaosu felt that Hu Shuo had already found some evidence, but he could not understand why he would dare to remain behind. But something that surprised Ren Xiaosu even more happened. Hu Shuo was not only going to stay here for one night. He did not intend to leave, at all. The next morning, the Wolf King sent a lot of pheasants over as promised. The pheasants were all stacked up at the entrance of the outpost. But this strange sight did not arouse Hu Shuo's suspicions. He just praised this location as a really good place to eat meat and acted as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Ren Xiaosu examined the old man's expression closely. Everyone clearly knew this was an abnormal situation, but Hu Shuo did not even ask about it and just practiced Tai Chi at the entrance of the outpost. After that, he would have Li Qingzheng and the others prepare meals as he still wanted to eat meat. Thus, everyone started barbecuing meat early in the morning until Ren Xiaosu felt like his whole body was full of the smoky smell of barbecue. Why didn't you ask where we got all this game from? Ren Xiaosu asked as they ate the meat. Hu Shuo chuckled and said, why should I care about where the food came from as long as there's something to eat? Surely it wasn't brought here by wolves, right? Ren Xiaosu was temporarily rendered speechless. He was getting more and more confused by Hu Shuo's intentions. On the morning of the third day, Hu Shuo still continued to practice Tai Chi after waking up. After that, he would get everyone to prepare meals. However, it was slightly different today. Another truck drove up the mountain, but the soldiers who came this time were a little different. They actually brought along bedding, a teapot, and some other daily necessities. Then they even cleaned up the house a second time for Hu Shuo. Ren Xiaosu was shocked to discover that Hu Shuo seemed to be planning on living here for an extended period. While the soldiers were cleaning the house, Ren Xiaosu carefully watched to see if Hu Shuo gave any strange instructions to the soldiers, like hinting at them to come and encircle the outpost with a larger force or something similar. However, he did not do anything like that. When the soldiers reported about some matters to Hu Shuo, they also did not purposely avoid doing so in the presence of Ren Xiaosu and the others. What the soldiers reported on was also related to Ren Xiaosu. An outpost on another hill had been attacked by wolves. Traces of wolf blood and fur were found there. The military was paying close attention to this matter and was planning on sending troops to eliminate the wolves in the mountains. Ren Xiaosu observed Hu Shuo's reaction, but Hu Shuo just laughed and said, "The wolves have nothing to do with our case, so let's not interfere." Right from the beginning, the old man seemed not to have linked the pheasants at the entrance of the outpost to the wolves. But Ren Xiaosu knew he was just playing dumb. At this moment, Li Qingzheng whispered to Ren Xiaosu, "The officer who sent over this old man's things is a senior colonel." Ren Xiaosu was stunned. How highly ranked would a person have to be in the Li consortium to order a senior colonel around like that? After that, no one came to the outpost again. Hu Shuo ended up staying there for the entire week. For some reason, Ren Xiaosu suddenly felt he might even be planning to spend the Lunar New Year together with them. One Hu Shuo also means speaking nonsense in English. Ren Xiaosu wondered, "So aren't you going back home?" During this period, the Wolf King sent over additional game to them on more than a few occasions. However, Hu Shuo did not ask about it and only cared about eating. Hu Shuo answered, "Since I don't have any children, there's no point in going home. I'm much happier living here." "You don't have any children?" Ren Xiaosu was taken aback. Did Hu Shuo remain single all his life or was he infertile? However, Hu Shuo watched the campfire in front of him as he said, "I had a daughter. In my earlier years, I left her in someone's care without anyone knowing so she wouldn't be at risk. But to my surprise, she still got into trouble in the end. It was already too late by the time I learned of it. All I have left now is a grandson who doesn't want to live with me." Ren Xiaosu did not expect this answer from him. However, the old man did not mention his son-in-law whatsoever and what kind of trouble his daughter got into. But it would be inappropriate for everyone to ask for too much detail. "Are you planning on spending the Lunar New Year here?" Ren Xiaosu next asked. Hu Shuo thought for a moment and answered, "It's not like I can't, but since you all are inviting me to stay, I can only accept your hospitality." Ren Xiaosu was dumbfounded. "Who's inviting you?" Ren Xiaosu had been guarding against the old man every day since the start in case he called upon his soldiers to wipe out the entire outpost after discovering some evidence. However, nothing happened even after such a long time had passed. Was he really here to investigate the case? No, it felt more like he was here on vacation. And he was even freeloading with no intention of paying at all. If they were to sell this exotic meat in the stronghold, it would surely fetch a high price for them. In fact, even though the big shots in the stronghold had access to a supply of meat, they were more interested in exotic meats. Whoever had the chance to taste exotic meat would definitely be able to show off to their friends. Ren Xiaosu got the feeling that this old man who claimed to be here to investigate the case was starting to look rather suspicious. Curious, Ren Xiaosu asked, "The Li Consortium has sent you to investigate the case, but you haven't even conducted any investigations. Won't the Li Consortium be unhappy with you?" "At my age, it's not like they care about me anymore," Hu Shuo said matter-of-factly. "Moreover, the younger generation of the Li Consortium are all brats. It wouldn't make a difference if any of them went missing." Ren Xiaosu was speechless. He did not know how he should assess this old man. Slowly, everyone started getting used to the fact that there was an additional person at the outpost. In addition, they slowly realized Hu Shuo did not have any heirs to him and was extremely easy to get along with. A few days later, Hu Shuo suddenly expressed his embarrassment at being a freeloader and that he could help out with some work. The moment he said that, nobody would dare to allow him to do so. He was too old. What if something happened to him after they made him perform some menial work like splitting logs or doing the dishes? Who could they approach to clear the air with if that happened? But Ren Xiaosu thought that since Hu Shuo held a very high position within the Li Consortium, he should also be very rich. It's definitely not suitable for you to perform menial work, so why don't you just pay? Li Qingzheng was startled when he heard Ren Xiaosu say this. He did not expect Ren Xiaosu to actually ask for money from Hu Shuo. Hu Shuo gave it some thought and said, "Aren't there 8 of you who are students? I've been seeing you all studying by yourselves every day, so why don't I become your teacher instead? That way, I won't be considered a freeloader anymore." Ha! Ren Xiaosu realized the old man was just reluctant to pay up. After Li Qingzheng, Ren Xiaosu and the others held a discussion, they deemed this as giving Hu Shuo something to do. Although, Ren Xiaosu wanted to see just how well he could teach. Ren Xiaosu had been rather melancholic recently. He knew it wouldn't do for the students to keep studying by themselves. Whenever they encountered problems, no one could help them resolve their queries. Sometimes, the students would ask him questions. But as the class monitor, he was totally clueless. The students were also a little curious regarding that. "Monitor, didn't you score 560 points during finals? Why does it seem like you don't know anything?" Ren Xiaosu did not know how to answer them when faced with the question. But since Hu Shuo had taken the initiative to be the teacher here, Ren Xiaosu was glad to see it happen. However, he said, "It's not 8 students, it's 9. I'm a student as well, and I want to be in the class too." It was Hu Shuo who was stunned this time. "You're a student?" When Hu Shuo was chatting with everyone, no one mentioned anything about this. Although the students kept addressing Ren Xiaosu as their class monitor, Hu Shuo thought they were actually calling him platoon commander. Moreover, Ren Xiaosu did not look like a student either. He thought for a while and said with a smile, "Sure, I'll teach the 9 of you then." Hu Shuo was a person who did things in a crisp and efficient manner. On the very same day, he held a lecture for Ren Xiaosu and the 8 male students. This way, everyone could finally be busy. Ren Xiaosu also came to realize that Hu Shuo seemed rather fond of being a teacher. During the break, the students would discuss in private. "Mr. Hu is able to make his lessons easy to understand and further expand our knowledge. He's much better at teaching than the previous math, physics, and chem teachers." "That's right, I didn't expect Grandpa to be so knowledgeable," Wang Yuji said. In fact, Ren Xiaosu also realized the examples brought up by Hu Shuo during the lectures were extremely easy to understand, and he could also talk endlessly without even looking at the textbooks. The knowledge he imparted always revolved around the key points in the textbooks, but he was able to bring it to a further level. However, Ren Xiaosu still had some difficulties in understanding the lessons as his foundation was missing. He would have to ponder over the things taught in class for a long time while the other students understood immediately. At the end of the lesson, Hu Shuo said to the students, "You can ask me in private if there's anything you still don't understand." In times like this, it's not easy to encounter such studious students like you. It's a pity that you can't attend university in the Li Consortium stronghold and further your studies. As the other students could understand what was taught during the lesson, they had no more questions after class ended. As it was evening by the time class was dismissed, Hu Shuo was about to gather everyone for a barbecue party. But before Hu Shuo could walk out of the house, he was stopped by Ren Xiaosu. Although the others did not have any questions, he had plenty of questions to ask. Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu amiably and said, "As the ancients said, if you know, recognize that you know. If you don't know, recognize that you don't know. Your attitude of seeking knowledge is very courageous. It's really admirable." But when Ren Xiaosu got started with his questions, the exchange went on until nearly midnight. Hu Shuo could see everyone else eating barbecue outside while he was busy clearing Ren Xiaosu's doubts to the point of feeling thirsty. He did not even have a chance to take a sip of water. Finally, he could not help but say, "Look, Ren Xiaosu, why don't I pay for the food instead? I'll continue to teach the other students, but as for you, you should do some self-study first to catch up on the progress." "No," Ren Xiaosu firmly said. Hu Shuo was stunned by this answer. He went deep into thought before saying with a sigh, "You can still come and ask me anytime in the future if there's something you don't understand." Hu Shuo's previous daily routine was to wake up at 6 am to practice Tai Chi until 7 am before eating breakfast. Then he would bask in the sun, chat, eat lunch, eat dinner, and finally go to bed at night. Now, he would still wake up at 6 am to practice Tai Chi until 7 am before eating breakfast. But then he would start class, eat lunch, resume teaching again, and get so annoyed with Ren Xiaosu that it made him lose his appetite for dinner and be unable to fall asleep at night. Throughout this, Ren Xiaosu kept wondering why on earth this old man came to their outpost. During this period, a group of combat troops from the consortium came to the outpost to investigate the wolf attack on the other outpost. They wanted to ask if any suspicious activities were seen around the vicinity but were sent away the moment they stepped into the outpost. It seemed like the officers all knew who Hu Shuo was, so they just left the place without further questioning. It didn't look like they found it strange that he was living here. This surprised Ren Xiaosu a little. Who on earth was this old man? However, he made a trip to the mountains that very night to inform the Wolf King that the wolf pack would need to go even deeper into the hinterlands of the mountain to settle down. That was because the Li Consortium would probably send troops to eliminate them. During his stay, Ren Xiaosu thought of asking Hu Shuo where Stronghold 88 was located since he felt Hu Shuo would definitely know. However, he was worried that if he asked Hu Shuo would think he was colluding with the enemy based on the current relationship between the Li Consortium and the Yang Consortium. Although they had been getting along rather well, Ren Xiaosu felt his relationship with Hu Shuo had still not reached the stage where they could trust each other. Seeing that the Lunar New Year was approaching, Li Qingzheng pulled Ren Xiaosu aside and whispered, "We've run out of salt, so we have to make a trip to town. We'll also need to purchase some New Year supplies as well." People at the other outposts were so poor they did not have enough to eat, and the supplies delivered to them were starting to lessen as well. Meanwhile, Ren Xiaosu and the others at this outpost were all looking energetic and in high spirits. They had even gotten sick of having meat every day and wanted to get some vegetables in their diet for a change. There was a small plot of land behind the outpost where they could grow vegetables. But if they wanted to grow vegetables in this weather, they would have to build a canvas shed to house the vegetables. However, they did not have any canvas to build the shed with. So Li Qingzheng had a discussion with Ren Xiaosu about making a trip to town. This was what Ren Xiaosu thought as well. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. Before leaving, Ren Xiaosu ordered Chen Wudi to not let Hu Shuo leave the outpost. If he left the outpost, Chen Wudi would have to follow him and find out what he was up to. When Hu Shuo heard Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng were going back to town today and might have to stay there for a night, he was nearly moved to tears. Honestly speaking, it was not easy for Hu Shuo to be moved at his age. After all, he had been through so much in life, so what kinds of situations had he not seen before? But today, he really felt a lingering sense of emotion. Hu Shuo said to Ren Xiaosu, "Purchase a lot of New Year supplies. There's no rush to come back too soon." Suddenly, Ren Xiaosu found it a little surprising that everyone had gotten used to having this strange old man living at the outpost, and even Hu Shuo himself seemed like he had gotten used to it too. How did all of these changes happen? It would take more than 3 hours to drive from the outpost to town. The distance was neither near nor far. The factory nearby was still operating late into the night as the vast and sophisticated war machine that was the Li Consortium ran at full gear, though no one knew where its chariots of war were headed. Throughout the journey, Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng saw supply trucks frequently driving between the stronghold and the factories, all bustling with activity. Although the vehicle broke down once during the journey, Li Qingzheng was really good at fixing vehicles. He simply lifted the hood and tinkered around for a while before the rundown military transport truck was running smoothly again. Ren Xiaosu had been separated from Yan Liuyuan and the others for more than a fortnight. Right now, he just wanted to quickly find Yan Liuyuan, Wang Fugui, and the others in town and get an update on their recent situation to see if they had encountered any difficulties. Li Qingzheng was even more excited. It was as though he was an exiled prisoner who was finally returning to a prosperous city. He kept mumbling during the journey, saying he would definitely look for his old flame for a rendezvous in town tonight after they sold off the meat. When they arrived in town, Ren Xiaosu saw some refugees heading home after buying some pork rind and fatty meat from a butcher's shop. When he saw some children receiving some cheap sweets from the adults, he could feel the air of festivity approaching. Even the people who could barely survive by working hard every day in these wastelands would still try their best to get some new clothes, buy a handful of sweets, and make some delicious dumplings for their children during the holiday. Although the world had been destroyed before, it did not mean that people in the wastelands did not have a right to be happy. Humans were always the best at finding joy amid hardship among all living things, as they were a tough and tenacious species. The people who had predicted that humans would descend into a completely cold and cruel world after the apocalypse did not actually understand humanity at all. Of course, it was still unsafe in town at night. There would always be people who wanted to get something without putting in the effort for it, but this was not something that was contradictory to happiness. When they arrived at the entrance of the town, Ren Xiaosu saw Yan Liuyuan crouching there with a blank stare. He quickly leaned out of the window and called out to him, "Liuyuan! Why are you crouching there?" When Yan Liuyuan saw Ren Xiaosu, his eyes lit up. "Bro, you're finally back. Haha, when a magpie flew into the yard this morning, I had a feeling that you would definitely come back to town. That's why I was waiting for you here." However, Ren Xiaosu felt that probably wasn't the truth. To hell with the magpie, as if there were really such coincidences in the world like that. Yan Liuyuan must have been waiting here every day since he left for the outpost, so that was probably why there was such a coincidence today. Ren Xiaosu opened the door and pulled Yan Liuyuan up into the passenger seat. As the passenger seat in the truck was very wide, it wouldn't be an issue for 3 people to fit in it. Ren Xiaosu asked, "Where are y'all living now?" Yan Liuyuan beamed and said, "We bought 2 brick townhouses near the gate of the stronghold, so we're currently living there." Uncle Fugui also reopened his grocery store. He said that he's already found some business contacts in the stronghold and has also struck up a good relationship with the town's administrators. Old Wang is so talented. Ren Xiaosu was really glad to hear that, and his praise was sincere. No matter where Wang Fugui went, he could always strike up good interpersonal relationships and bring great convenience to their lives. A Chinese saying goes, "When the magpie arrives, good fortune will follow." It is regarded as a happy messenger. Li Qingzheng was thinking that since he and Ren Xiaosu were now friends, and that they were also leading a legitimately good life at the outpost, maybe he should return the bribes he collected from them back to Ren Xiaosu. However, Li Qingzheng still felt a little reluctant upon realizing he would have to give up such a large sum of money at once. Along the way, a woman saw Yan Liuyuan through the truck's window and said cheerfully, "Liuyuan, is that boy next to you your brother that you've always been talking about? You haven't waited in vain by crouching at the entrance of town for so many days. He's finally back. Here are 3 eggs for you. You can cook them for your brother when you get back home this evening." Yan Liuyuan accepted the eggs with a smile. However, he handed 1 egg back to her and only kept 2 of them. "Yes, this is my brother, but the one driving is not, so there's no need to give him an egg." Li Qingzheng was speechless. "Am I not a person? Why am I the only one who doesn't get an egg?" Ren Xiaosu said with a smile, you seem to be quite popular in this town. In truth, Yan Liuyuan was especially popular with the women when they were living back in the town of Stronghold 113. Now that his face was always clean, he looked handsome and smart. It became natural that he would become a friend of the women. Yan Liuyuan smiled and said, I've asked around with the townspeople and found out a lot of information lately. After getting here, Uncle Fugui has done a lot of small favors for many people and gained a foothold in town. That's why we are quite popular around here. Of course, there are still many ungrateful people around as well. The small favors were things like helping others repair their furniture, giving away snacks and sweets, and paying a slightly higher price when receiving goods. Wang Fugui did all of those in moderation and never went beyond doing small favors. In Wang Fugui's opinion, doing big favors would not only make it hard to make friends, but it would also offend people easily. Furthermore, it was pointless to do big favors for others. If he were really in danger, most would not return the favor. Instead, they would more likely kick him while he was down. Wang Fugui was only doing so for the sake of getting things easily accomplished in town and was not expecting anyone to give him any assistance when he got into trouble. It was better to rely on oneself than on others. No, it was better to rely on Ren Xiaosu than on others. When Ren Xiaosu heard that Yan Liuyuan had gathered a lot of information, he asked curiously, "What have you found out?" Currently, there were military camps stationed all around the area not far outside of town as different troops continually rotated shifts between themselves. Yan Liuyuan said, "I heard that the Li Consortium's combat troops that went to Stronghold 109 to eliminate the experimentals had failed in their mission. The initial batch of troops has been recalled and at least half of them had died." "How did you know about that?" Ren Xiaosu frowned. "The soldiers stationed near town can't help themselves from seeking thrills, and those single women were also happy to have a soldier from the organization as their backer." Yan Liuyuan said, "They would sometimes share with their women these matters and said that their assault went very smoothly at the beginning. However, they were immediately defeated once the experimentals dragged it out into urban warfare. Furthermore, the forward operating base was destroyed by the experimentals. Now they plan to continue sending troops over there and resort to using heavy weapons in battle. Even if they destroy the stronghold, they have to eliminate the experimentals." This outcome was quite in line with Ren Xiaosu's prediction. When he saw the combat troops deployed to Stronghold 109 in a hurry had not brought any heavy weapons with them. It seemed like they wanted to keep the buildings in the stronghold as intact as possible so they could avoid spending too much on rebuilding. But if they engaged something like the experimentals in urban warfare, it would be as good as digging their own graves. Their speed and strength, several times that of the average person, gave them a huge advantage when fighting in built-up areas. Unless the organization fought against the experimentals with troops consisting of supernatural beings, using automatic rifles at close range would not be effective. It resulted in the combat troops made up of normal humans suffering a devastating defeat. But now that the Li Consortium was extremely determined to eliminate the experimentals, Ren Xiaosu felt those creatures were likely going to face a tough battle soon. As a human, Ren Xiaosu certainly hoped the Li Consortium could wipe out a tumor like the experimentals. No matter how evil a person was, they would still have some humanity in them. The experimentals had none left. "There's something else," Yan Liuyuan said. "When the school in town learned of Ms. Jiang's identity, they wanted to ask her to be a substitute teacher at the school. However, she rejected the offer because she said that as the only supernatural being at home, she had to take care of the family." Ren Xiaosu nodded. From this point alone, it seemed Zhang Wu was still worthy of their trust. "Any other news?" Yan Liuyuan thought for a moment and said, "Oh yes, it seems like there are also members of the Pyro Company lurking around here. Although I don't know where they are, there's usually leaflets scattered around town overnight. They're the same ones we saw in Stronghold 109. "The Pyro Company?" Ren Xiaosu frowned. They could not get into too much detail as Li Qingzhang was around. But he had witnessed the pyro company's behavior before, and if they knew there was a supernatural being nearby, they would definitely spare no effort in catching them. However, he wasn't too afraid of that. After all, he felt the pyro company was really quite weak after crossing swords with them, but it would be dangerous if Zhongwu exposed her identity. "Here we are," Yan Liuyuan shouted cheerfully while pointing at 2 stone courtyards. "This is the place." When the truck came to a stop, Yan Liuyuan jumped out and rushed off. "Big sister Xiaoyu, Ms. Zhang, look who's back." With this shout from Yan Liuyuan, everyone came rushing out into the courtyard, including Xiaoyu, Zhongwu, and the female students before Ren Xiaosu could even get out of the truck. Li Qingzheng stared at the sight of this. He felt that Ren Xiaosu was a blessed man and a role model for other men. Ren Xiaosu said to Wang Fugui with a smile, "We brought some game down from the mountains. They're loaded in the back of the truck. Calculate the prices and settle the bill with Platoon Commander Li. A portion of it is free as I brought it as a gift to y'all for the new year." Wang Fugui and the others froze for a moment. As expected of Ren Xiaosu. Although he was now a sentry at a faraway outpost, he still managed to bring back meat for them on his return. Wang Fugui smiled and said, "It happens that there are many troops stationed nearby and they have a shortage of meat as well. I can definitely sell this meat for a good price." Wang Fugui then walked to the back of the military transport truck and looked inside. When he saw everything, he was stunned. "There's this much meat." Ren Xiaosu handed him a list. "These are the items that we need. Help us get them, as well as salt, seasonings, and clothes." "Okay, you can count on me. Go inside and rest up." Wang Fugui said with a smile, "You don't have to personally worry yourself over such things." Li Qingzheng, who was beside them, was watching the entire conversation. He had thought that Wang Fugui was the backbone of this group. But now it seemed like everyone was under the command of Ren Xiaosu. How old was this young man? Why would a shrewd businessman like Wang Fugui even listen to him? Ren Xiaosu asked, "Did anything happen at home recently? Anyone give you any trouble?" Now that Ren Xiaosu was back, he thought that if Yan Liuyuan and the others had encountered any trouble, he would handle it for them before leaving again. "There isn't too much trouble. It's currently very chaotic in town, and the organization's soldiers are keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. So it's usually only old Wang who heads out to handle any matters. The rest of us don't go out at all," Xiaoyu explained. "We can also prevent any bad guys from getting ideas about us this way." I suppose that's the only way now." Ren Xiaosu realized Xiaoyu and the rest of the group were still quite cautious. He also told the female students around him, "Y'all should learn from big sister Xiaoyu. Equip yourselves in the next few days with a knife each so that y'all can defend yourselves. If anyone harasses you, just stab them with the knife." A female student hesitated before saying, "But we're girls." Ren Xiaosu had to give this some thought before saying, "I'll get old Wang to paint the knives pink for y'all then." The female students were taken aback for a bit before breaking out into laughter. They said, "All right, monitor." But at this moment, someone knocked on the door. Xiaoyu muttered, "Who could be knocking on our door at this time?" But when she went to open the door, she heard a sonorous male voice say from outside, "Hello, I'm looking for Ren Xiaosu." Ren Xiaosu immediately turned his head to the door. Only a handful of people would know to find him here at this time. Furthermore, this person's voice sounded extremely familiar. It was Li Shenton. Li Shenton was smartly dressed in the Li Consortium's military uniform as he stood at the door. Ren Xiaosu hesitated, so Li Shenton smiled first and said, "What's up? Am I not welcome here? Please come in." Ren Xiaosu signaled to Xiaoyu, who was blocking the door, to let him in. Following which, he whispered to the others, "Everyone, go inside the house." Everyone noticed that something was wrong and knew this was an uninvited guest. Fortunately, old Wang and Li Qingzheng were still outside tallying the goods. Otherwise, it would be difficult for Ren Xiaosu to come up with an excuse to send Li Qingzheng away. Li Shenton walked into the courtyard and looked around his surroundings curiously. Then he sat on the stone bench in the courtyard and said, "What a warm and homey place this is." Ren Xiaosu looked at his uniform and asked, "How did you learn I'm here?" "Ah." It was as though Li Shenton recalled something at this moment. "I hypnotized the residents in the surrounding areas so they would inform me when they saw an unfamiliar young man entering the courtyard here." Li Shenton did not avoid the topic of hypnosis when he spoke. Ren Xiaosu wondered, "Don't you think it's inappropriate to do something like that? Superpowers are meant to be used." Li Shenton said with a smile, "It's not like I hindered their day-to-day lives anyway." Wearing the military uniform, Li Shenton looked just like a handsome, young, and promising boy next door. However, others would definitely not be able to imagine the disaster he had wrought upon Stronghold 109. "Then what are you looking for me for?" Ren Xiaosu gave him a look. At this moment, Xiaohu came out of the house and placed a pot of tea and 2 cups on the stone table. Li Shenton smiled and said graciously, "Thank you, big sister Xiaohu. I'm warning you. Don't you dare hypnotize the people around me," Ren Xiaosu said in an unfriendly manner. "I won't." Li Shenton held up a teacup and said with a smile, "We're friends, after all. How can I possibly hypnotize my friends' friends?" He gently held the teacup and warmed his hands. As steam wafted up from the teacup, the scene in the courtyard was exceptionally harmonious and peaceful. "I heard you were sent to a faraway outpost, so how have you been lately?" Li Shenton said with a smile. His tone sounded like he really was an old friend of Ren Xiaosu. Ren Xiaosu said nonchalantly, "Not too bad, I guess." But in the next moment, Li Shenton said, "I heard 2 nano-soldiers went missing out there, and they were even the family members of the Li Consortium. When I checked the list of that outpost later and saw your name on it, I knew you must have been the one behind it." Ren Xiaosu frowned but did not answer him. There was no need for any explanation between intelligent people, and no evidence was necessary to prove their suspicion either. Ren Xiaosu only wanted to know now what Li Shenton was planning. Then Li Shenton continued, "When we parted ways at Stronghold 109, I thought we would only get to see each other again in another few years. I didn't expect to meet you again so soon. I also heard a neighboring outpost near yours was attacked by the wolves and another nano-soldier went missing. I thought that might have been done by you. I have control over humans while you can control wolves. It seems like we were really fated to meet after all." Ren Xiaosu was amused. "Why don't you just state your purpose? There's no need to beat around the bush." He knew there was no point in defending himself. There was nothing wrong with Li Shenton's reconstruction of events. If the Li Consortium found out there was an extremely dangerous supernatural being over there, they would probably focus their attention on him immediately. For example, Hu Shuo had probably discovered something about him. But now Li Shenton turned serious. "You're probably still a little misunderstood. I actually came here today to catch up with an old friend. After all, I've got too few friends to go around." "Curious," Ren Xiaosu asked, "why do you always think that I'm your friend?" Li Shenton smiled and said, "Because I always feel a sense of endearment whenever I see you." "All right then," Ren Xiaosu changed the subject and asked, "Why are you dressed in military attire?" "I'm an active serviceman of the Li Consortium now." Li Shenton appraised his military uniform. "Does it look fitting? Our 4th Brigade will be heading to the front line of Stronghold 109 tomorrow. There are still many experimentals active over there." Ren Xiaosu thought the experimentals were doomed after the Li Consortium decided on using heavy weapons against them. However, Li Shenton's appearance had put huge uncertainty on this battle. Ren Xiaosu could already sense that the Li Consortium's combat troops heading to Stronghold 109 this time would probably perish. Right from the beginning, Li Shenton had never intended to target any particular stronghold. He sought to destroy the entire Li Consortium. Even if he were to perish with everyone, he would not hesitate to do it. Ren Xiaosu gave a mental sigh. There really was nothing wrong with the Li Consortium's previous decision to send this guy to a psychiatric hospital. Comparing Chen Wudi to him, Chen Wudi was just like a normal person. Li Shenton stood up and walked to the door. It's time to say goodbye now. After this farewell, I'm afraid it will be a really long time before I see you again. Please take care of yourself. The people in this neighborhood who harbor dirty thoughts on the ladies living here will commit suicide after you leave town tomorrow. You won't need to worry about that. Please consider it a small gift from me and accept it kindly. Ren Xiaosu looked at Li Shenton. I'm grateful for your gift. Li Shenton dismissed it with a smile. You don't have to be so polite. There's one more thing, though. The Li Consortium is planning to send their elite nano-soldiers to eliminate the wolves. They're also considering it a training exercise using the wolves as opponents. You should have your wolf buddies lie low. Some of the nano-soldiers can be really strong. Ren Xiaosu was startled. He could collect more nano-machines. Suddenly, Li Shenton was unsure of if he had seen a look of anticipation in Ren Xiaosu's eyes. Do you know where the Pyro Company's members around here are hiding? Ren Xiaosu switched the topic. Li Shenton said, they just left this afternoon, but I don't know where they were heading. Maybe they went off somewhere to try their luck at catching supernatural beings? Don't worry, they don't know about you. He then walked out the door. This demon was about to head for the front lines with the Li Consortium's combat troops. Ren Xiaosu suddenly felt that if there were more people like Li Shenton in this world, war really might not be too far off. There was always a state of balance between the organizations as everyone slowly plundered resources to strengthen themselves. This was a process of gaining power as part of a larger group. But if a crack suddenly appeared in one organization, the others would definitely be more than happy to get a greater share of the spoils, right? After Li Shenton left, Xiaohu came out of the house and said in curiosity, that's Li Shenton, right? I saw him at the shop back in Stronghold 109. Ren Xiaosu frowned as he thought about something else. He suddenly said, I might have to go back now. I feel like there's a hidden meaning to Li Shenton's words. Initially, Ren Xiaosu had planned to stay in town for the night. After all, they hadn't seen each other in a long time, and many things still needed to be discussed. But when he asked for news of the Pyro Company, Li Shenton told him that they had left that afternoon. This made Ren Xiaosu a little uneasy. Yan Liuyuan asked in a stunned manner next to him, you're leaving already? Yes, Ren Xiaosu sighed. Since there's still a month before the Lunar New Year, I'll definitely have a chance to come back again. Or I can take y'all to the outpost to celebrate the new year. Really? Yan Liuyuan's eyes lit up as he wanted to have a look at what the place Ren Xiaosu went to be a sentry looked like. With that, Ren Xiaosu went outside. By this time, Wang Fugui and Li Qingzheng were just about wrapped up with handing over the money and goods to each other. Looking at their expressions, they both seemed happy with the deal. Lord of Wolves, we have to leave now. Something urgent came up, so we have to go back immediately, Ren Xiaosu said to Li Qingzheng. Li Qingzheng wondered, we have to leave now? Aren't we gonna stay a little longer? I still haven't. We have to go now, Ren Xiaosu said in a serious tone. Li Qingzheng thought for a moment and said, all right then, let's head back now. When Li Qingzheng and Ren Xiaosu got into the truck, Wang Fugui said, Xiaosu, you must take care of yourself. The whole family is depending on you now, so nothing must happen to you. Don't worry. Ren Xiaosu said in a low voice, nothing has happened to me even after 2 strongholds were destroyed. I'm hardy. Wang Fugui said with a smile, that's true. As long as you're here, our days will definitely get better and better. After that exchange, Li Qingzheng started the truck and drove out of town. There were 2 grocery stores near the gate. One of them belonged to a woman, and the other was recently opened by Wang Fugui. Ever since Wang Fuegui arrived, business at the grocery store next door plummeted and caused the neighbor to despise him. While Wang Fuegui was seeing Ren Xiaosu off, the fat woman next door leaned against the doorframe of her shop and munched on sunflower seeds while looking at Wang Fuegui scornfully. After Ren Xiaosu left, she suddenly shouted at old Wang, "Why? Is that one of your family members?" Wang Fuegui smiled and said, "That's our boss. He's the greatest." The woman spat out the sunflower seed hull at the entrance of her shop with disdain. "What's the big deal about a crappy soldier from the private army?" In the eyes of the town's refugees, the private troops were no longer worth much in the present day. It was still the organization's own soldiers who were more powerful. It wasn't only this woman who thought this way. Some people also used to believe there was an influential man in Wang Fuegui's family backing him. But now they were a little disappointed when they found out he was just a private soldier. Wang Fuegui just smiled without saying a word. They were from two different worlds, and it was impossible to speak with someone who had limited experience. As Li Qingzheng drove on the road, he did not ask Ren Xiaosu why he wanted to return to the outpost so urgently. Ren Xiaosu also discovered at this moment that Li Qingzheng might have realized something based on his attitude. Ren Xiaosu looked at Li Qingzheng and said, I don't know anything," interrupted Li Qingzheng. Ren Xiaosu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Thinking back to the time the wolves attacked the military transport truck, Li Qingzheng took the initiative to get everyone to go back into their houses. At that time, Li Qingzheng might have realized something. He heard Li Qingzheng say, "When I was still a child, my father took me to a fortune teller in town. When he said that my entire life would be a tough one, my father almost beat him up. But he also added that I had one chance to turn things around in this life." "What was the chance?" Ren Xiaosu asked curiously. "He said I would meet my benefactor at the age of 29, and I turned 29 on the day I met you." Ren Xiaosu sighed. Superstitions can be really harmful. The journey back only took 3 hours since Li Qingzheng drove a little faster as Ren Xiaosu said it was urgent. When they arrived at the beginning of the mountain road leading to the outpost, Ren Xiaosu noticed some tire tracks on the ground. His face turned to one of alarm. "Hurry up! Trespassers have gone up." This dirt road was the only path to the outpost. The snow had just melted and the ground had become muddy. If a vehicle drove on it, its tires would definitely leave marks on the ground. This sight set off alarm bells in Ren Xiaosu's head. Based on what Li Shenton had said, the pyro company was only coming out to try their luck. Perhaps they thought the disappearance of the two officers might have something to do with a supernatural being when they learned about it. So they came to the nearby outpost to see if they could find any supernatural beings hiding here. The truck drove all the way up to the outpost. But when Ren Xiaosu, who was initially extremely anxious, was greeted by the sight of the open space in front of the outpost, he froze. He saw Hu Shuo sitting in a relaxed position next to the campfire and eating barbecue with the others. 5 strangers knelt next in a row to them with injuries covering their bodies. One of them was even coughing up blood as he knelt there. The moment Hu Shuo saw Ren Xiaosu, his expression shifted. "Why are you back so soon?" In reality, there wasn't any problem with the direction of the Pyro Company's investigations. They speculated that the disappearance of those 2 nano-soldiers might have something to do with supernatural beings, so they came here to try their luck to see if they could find that person. This speculation was extremely accurate. Ren Xiaosu was not wrong either. After Li Shenton informed him about the situation with the Pyro Company, he rushed back during the night as he was worried they would harm the students at the outpost. There wasn't anything wrong with that either. The only surprise that neither the Pyro Company nor Ren Xiaosu had expected was that Hu Shuo was powerful beyond measure. The reason Hu Shuo was surprised when he saw Ren Xiaosu was because he would have to teach Ren Xiaosu again now that he was back. It was just like how office workers finally had the weekend off only for their bosses to suddenly demand they work overtime. This immediately spoiled the mood. Ren Xiaosu explained, Can't you see that I really missed all of you? That's why we rushed back to the outpost. So what's going on here? In truth, Ren Xiaosu already knew Hu Shuo was definitely not a simple person from the beginning. How could a normal old man head up to the mountains alone in the middle of the night to investigate a case? Wasn't he afraid of getting killed by the criminal as well? So he must have had something that gave him the confidence. Moreover, Chen Wudi mentioned he was the earth deity. Based on Ren Xiaosu's deductions, what Chen Wudi probably meant was, this man has a superpower. Perhaps mental patients possessed some sort of unique perception that enabled Chen Wudi to identify the true nature of someone simply by their appearance, as he was spot on in his observations. Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and said with a smile, "Quickly come and have some meat." All 5 of the Pyro Company members looked back at Ren Xiaosu, but none of them dared to speak. Hu Shuo said, "They're from the Pyro Company. I was searching for them some time ago, but they managed to hide themselves really well. As some other disturbances were going on at that time, I haven't been able to locate them at all. Who knew they would actually send themselves to our doorstep just as I was planning to spend the new year here?" Ren Xiaosu thought to himself, "So you are really here to spend the new year? You really don't consider yourself an outsider, do you?" However, now was not the time to think about that. Ren Xiaosu had realized most people would usually be afraid or disgusted if they encountered members of the Pyro Company. But when Hu Shuo encountered these 5 members of the Pyro Company, he got a vague sense of surprise. "What are they doing here?" Ren Xiaosu asked. Hu Shuo smiled ambiguously at him and said, "These are probably the main culprits in the killing of those 2 Li Consortium officers." When the members of the Pyro Company heard that, they started panicking. "We're also here to investigate this case. They weren't killed by us. Did I say that you all could speak?" Hu Shuo said as he stared at them. The 5 Pyro Company members quickly shut their mouths. Ren Xiaosu asked the people around him in a whisper, "Who witnessed their fight?" The students shook their heads and said, "Only Big Brother Wudi was outside at the time. We were all studying by ourselves in our houses." As such, Ren Xiaosu asked Chen Wudi, "What happened between them just now? Can you describe it to me?" He was trying to deduce how strong Hu Shuo was based on the description of the battle with this question. When Chen Wudi recalled the battle, he could only say, "Holy shit!" Ren Xiaosu was speechless. As Ren Xiaosu waited for him to relate the rest of the incident, he realized Chen Wudi had already lowered his head back down to eat. So Chen Wudi's description of the entire battle was simply "holy shit"? Can't you be more cultured? Ren Xiaosu was saddened. How could he judge the strength of Hu Shuo through a description like that? However, the little information he could get from this was that when Hu Shuo made his move, his strength even surprised Chen Wudi. "Is he stronger than you?" Ren Xiaosu asked Chen Wudi. Chen Wudi thought for a while. "No, he's not." "You seem quite confident in yourself," Ren Xiaosu lamented. Asking Chen Wudi about such serious matters would probably just make himself even more confused. During this recent period, he had always seen Hu Shuo getting up early to practice Tai Chi. Could his boxing really be that powerful? At this moment, Ren Xiaosu looked at Hu Shuo and asked, "They were the ones who murdered those 2 officers?" Hu Shuo said earnestly, "That's right. The Li Consortium has given me until tomorrow as the deadline to investigate the case. Since we've been searching extensively for the murderer and we're still unable to capture anyone even though we have been working so hard, they must be considered the murderers." Ren Xiaosu was surprised. When did Hu Shuo ever work hard while he was here? He was obviously just here on vacation to eat meat. This old man had never seriously gone after the murderer at all. However, Ren Xiaosu was definitely glad this Pyro Company team would be made the scapegoat. It was fine as long as he did not get himself caught. But Ren Xiaosu somehow felt that Hu Shuo had already made some discoveries. Neither of them were fools. Just the fact that he had the runs for 6 hours when Hu Shuo first arrived was unacceptable. Moreover, the Wolf King had been sending all that game to them. Even an idiot would notice that something was going on between this outpost and the wolves. Ren Xiaosu was not going to assume he had gotten lucky. The two of them just had a tacit agreement with each other for now. But when Ren Xiaosu thought of this, he suddenly wondered what Hu Shuo's motives were. Was it just so that he could eat all the meat he wanted without worry? But how could that be? But there should definitely be an interrogation process, right? Ren Xiaosu wondered, what if they would rather die than admit to the crime? If they die, they wouldn't be able to not admit to it. Hu Shuo said calmly, isn't that what rather die than admit to it really means? When the soldiers of the Pyro Company heard that, they knew they had no chance to survive. How could they be willing to stay here and wait for their deaths when they possessed strength that surpassed normal humans? In that instant, those 5 people got up at the same time and fled down the mountain. They had never thought about fighting against Hu Shuo and Ren Xiaosu. They couldn't even defeat Hu Shuo alone, and now, there was another unknown factor in Ren Xiaosu. Therefore, their only way to survive was to escape. While the Pyro members escaped, Hu Shuo sat there without moving. When Ren Xiaosu saw that Hu Shuo did not make a move, he also stayed still. Ren Xiaosu smiled and said, aren't you gonna pursue them? Hu Shuo was amused. How can I pursue them with these old limbs of mine? Why don't you go after them instead? The members of the Pyro Company are all supernatural beings. Why would I go after them when I'm just a normal person? Ren Xiaosu said with a grimace. They watched as the members of the Pyro Company got further and further away. The two of them sat there with neither giving chase. When the members of the Pyro Company turned around and saw this, they were overjoyed. They were so surprised no one was pursuing them. When they ran down to the hillside, a part of the turf on the mountain path suddenly shifted. In the blink of an eye, an entire platoon rushed out from the shadows of the forest as gunshots rang out from trenches. The 5 exhausted people were caught off guard. When Ren Xiaosu heard those gunshots on the hillside, he realized he didn't even know when the ambush was laid. This time, Li Qingzheng had made a rather successful deal with Old Wang. He not only managed to bring back enough salt to preserve the rest of the meat, but also procured rice vinegar, star anise, Sichuan peppercorn, and some other spices too. Although, they could just grab a handful of Sichuan peppercorns from the wilderness since they were commonly found there. While conducting the trade, Li Qingzheng realized it was much easier to do business with Old Wang than to slowly sell the cured meat by himself. At this moment, someone from the other platoon walked over and said to Hu Shuo, we've gunned down all 5 of them. All right. Hu Shuo nodded. Take them back to the stronghold and report the mission status to the higher UPS. Tell them to be careful and stay wary of the Pyro Company. There is absolutely no mistake in killing anyone who is from the Pyro Company. Roger. After the soldier received the order, he led his men away. But Ren Xiaosu was a little puzzled as he looked at this group of people. They were not wearing the combat uniform of the Li Consortium, yet they were much stronger than the private troops. Which fighting force did they belong to? Hu Shuo said with a smile as he ate, I feel so relieved now that I've finally completed the assignment. You all might know, but I was so worried about this matter for the past few days that I couldn't eat or sleep well. Ren Xiaosu asked the students next to him, what did the teacher talk about today? Let me have a look at your notes so that I can catch up with the lectures and clarify my doubts with Mr. Hu before he goes to bed. But when he said this, Hu Shuo immediately stood up and said, ha 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 ha, I'm sleepy. I'm off to bed. After Hu Shuo went back into his house, Ren Xiaosu had the students unload everything from the truck into the house. He also distributed to them the winter clothing that Xiaoyu had procured. Chen Wudi went back into the house and happily put on his new clothes. These things were all provided for Ren Xiaosu, Chen Wudi, and the 8 other students. When Li Qingzheng saw this, he felt sad. How nice it is to have a family. When it got late into the night, Ren Xiaosu quietly headed to the depths of the mountains. He wanted to give the wolves another reminder to not get ambushed by the nano-soldiers that were going to be sent in. After all, the wolves were burdened with their young right now. It would be upsetting if the Lee Consortium's elite soldiers attacked them and the wolves did not have enough time to bring their wolf cubs with them when they fled. Before he could get deep into the mountains, he saw the Wolf King waiting for him on the mountain path. When the Wolf King saw Ren Xiaosu, it led him straight to the wolf den without having to communicate it to him. Ren Xiaosu kept muttering, "Have they fully recovered from their injuries yet? Did they eat their food according to my advice as a doctor?" The Wolf King did not even bother replying to his questions. When Ren Xiaosu arrived at the wolf den, the wolves seemed to be much friendlier towards him than last time. Ren Xiaosu first checked on the wounds of the injured wolves and only felt at ease after seeing they had already healed. He sat on a large rock and said, "Seems the Lee Consortium is sending their elite soldiers to spar with y'all. Are you confident with handling them?" The Wolf King looked at him with apparent disdain. Ren Xiaosu said in seriousness, "But those are super soldiers with nanomachines. They've been specially assigned to eliminate y'all. The Lee Consortium isn't stupid either. If they're willing to attack you, they must have a certain confidence in their plan." The Wolf King was still giving him a disdainful look. "All right then," Ren Xiaosu sighed. "But you better not eat them after they're dead. They have nanomachines in them, so y'all might get diarrhea if you eat them. When the time comes, hide their corpses for me. I'll use the black medicine to make a deal with you." When the Wolf King heard the words black medicine, its eyes seemed to light up. "But you definitely have to move your wolf den further away," Ren Xiaosu said, "after all, your wolf cubs can't run fast enough. If a stray bullet hit them, that'd be bad." On his way back, Ren Xiaosu was wondering if he could get his hands on the nanomachines at a faster rate with the wolves' assistance. Ren Xiaosu was even starting to get a little excited at the thought. The next morning, everyone was busy taking out the meat they had hidden away to continue curing the meat. They had to stop the process temporarily due to the lack of salt. The group of men set up several tables at the entrance of the outpost and worked tirelessly, sweating profusely. But when they thought about how this was the source of better food, everyone felt exceptionally accomplished. If those who did not know the truth went up the mountain and saw this place, they would probably mistake it for a cured meat delicatessen and not an outpost. Everyone had left their guns inside the houses, and some of them had not even touched them for several days. To be honest, no one would be willing to be a soldier in a god-forsaken place like this if it weren't for survival. These people did not feel a sense of belonging to the Lee Consortium anyway. In the present day, nobody had any faith or feelings to speak of. It would be good enough to survive. So having meat to eat was far more important than anything else. Someone said with a smile, "It's almost the start of spring. We should find some grape seeds in the mountains and plant them here in the open space behind the outpost. When we harvest the grapes in summer, we can even make our own wine. Yeah, let's build a grape trellis. We can also plant some garlic, onions, cucumbers, and carrots next to it. During summer, we can mix the cucumber with minced garlic and some shredded carrots to pair with the wine. That will truly be a comfy life." With all the laughter at the entrance of the outpost, the cold of the winter seemed to be more bearable. Everyone's mentality was different with the Lunar New Year approaching, and they were only thinking about how to celebrate the joyous occasion. Ren Xiaosu said, "There's something that I want to announce. I still have some family members who are staying in town that I was thinking of bringing over with the truck for the new year. But we definitely don't have enough houses for all of them to live in. Let's work a little harder for the next few days so we can build another wooden house for them. Is anyone here good at carpentry?" "Me," Li Qingsheng said with a smile, "I worked as a carpenter for 2 years. I'm really good at it." "All right, let's help Ren Xiaosu build a house once we finish curing the meat," a man said with a smile. This man was an escapee who had fled with Ren Xiaosu's group here. He was constantly bullied by Li Qingsheng when he first arrived at the outpost. But after everyone integrated into the group, the animosity faded. Sometimes, Ren Xiaosu thought it was actually quite good for the group to live here in the mountains and be self-sufficient. All of a sudden, the voice from the palace said, "A side quest has been unlocked. Ensure there are no deaths within the wolf pack for 7 days to unlock a new product in the vending machine, seeds." When Ren Xiaosu heard this, he froze for a second. Did the palace unlock the side quest with seeds as the reward because he thought about wanting to be self-sufficient in the mountains? But the palace didn't mention what the seeds would grow into. Could they have magical effects? These seeds represented a dream, and Ren Xiaosu could only hope that it would live up to the rewards the side quest gave. If these seeds turned out to be something magical, Ren Xiaosu could find a plot of land and become self-sufficient. The only problem was that it might not be so easy to ensure that there would be no deaths in the wolf pack over the next 7 days. It looked like Ren Xiaosu would have to pay extra attention to the Li Consortium's nano-soldiers. If he couldn't complete this quest, what should he do if the palace decided not to issue another seeds-related side quest to him? While everyone was processing the cured meat, Hu Shuo was practicing Tai Chi off to the side. Ren Xiaosu suddenly thought of something, so he asked, "Are you practicing Tai Chi as a form of cultivation?" Cultivation? Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and said with a laugh, "I'm only doing it as a form of exercise and discipline, so don't be overthinking things." Ren Xiaosu really wanted to know what powers Hu Shuo had. In fact, Hu Shuo didn't dodge any questions, but the one who witnessed Hu Shuo fight was Chen Wudi. This rendered Ren Xiaosu speechless. When Li Qingzheng mentioned he had been learning boxing styles since he was a child, Ren Xiaosu brushed it off like it was some kind of superstition. But seeing Hu Shuo practice Tai Chi every day with so much vigor, Ren Xiaosu could not help but think that Li Qingzheng also knew a powerful boxing style. Right at this moment, over a dozen off-road vehicles suddenly roared up from the foot of the mountain. When everyone here saw the off-road vehicles, they immediately stopped working. "Put everything away," Li Qingzheng instructed quietly. The cured meat they were making was definitely not going to be considered official business around here. After all, their primary duty was to keep a lookout for enemies. If those people were here for an inspection, they would definitely fail them. However, Ren Xiaosu already knew they couldn't be the inspection personnel. The dozen off-road vehicles arrived in such a hurry with an overbearing manner. It looked like it was going to get really busy at this outpost. Everyone had thought they wouldn't have much contact with people after getting posted to this faraway outpost. But in the end, all these different people came here every few days. What was going on here? Ren Xiaosu quietly observed the situation. He realized Hu Shuo had gone into a house at some point. It was as though he didn't want to come face to face with these people. When the off-road vehicles came to a stop at the entrance of the outpost, 4 people stepped out from each of them. They were all dressed in combat uniforms and held the rank of officer. On this topic, Ren Xiaosu and the others were soldiers as well, but they were all irregularly dressed with only a few of them in their military uniforms. On the other hand, the soldiers who had just arrived were all smartly dressed, resulting in a stark contrast between the two sides. From appearances alone, Ren Xiaosu and the others looked more like they were on chow duty. All they were lacking were some aprons. But what surprised Ren Xiaosu and the others was that there was actually someone they knew among these officers. To be precise, it was someone the refugees knew. Back when these randomly assembled soldiers were undergoing their physicals, one of them in the group managed to pass the synchronization test. But now, that person had moved on up to become a proper officer of the Li Consortium. Ren Xiaosu vaguely remembered that this refugee who had been elevated in status was called Lin Qi. When Lin Qi got out of the vehicle, he was taken aback when he saw Ren Xiaosu and the other refugees. But right after, he laughed. "Oh, I didn't expect to see these familiar faces." Ren Xiaosu and the others did not say anything. Lin Qi's dignified look today would not give away the awful state he was in while fleeing from Stronghold 109. His polished combat boots fit him very well, as did his uniform. Someone behind Lin Qi asked, you actually know these people? Lin Chi hesitated for a moment before saying, we came together to Stronghold 108 from Stronghold 109. Now that I've met them again at this remote outpost, I'll definitely need to take care of these little brothers of mine. Coming from Lin Qi's mouth, Ren Xiaosu and the others had suddenly become his little brothers. Lin Qi was feeling a great sense of superiority. During their escape, Ren Xiaosu's group had it so easy the entire journey. But look at how the tables had turned. Ren Xiaosu could only remain as a refugee while he had become an officer of the Li Consortium. He was even a first lieutenant. The gulf that was the stronghold separated Lin Qi from Ren Xiaosu at this moment. Their statuses were as different as that of the heavens and the earth. Ren Xiaosu's group did not really find Lin Qi to be that great. In the past, Ren Xiaosu might be envious of the stronghold residents. But now, he wasn't the least bit envious at all. But the other refugees who used to walk alongside Lin Qi were feeling somewhat embarrassed. When they saw Lin Qi in his uniform, they did not even dare to come forward to speak with him. Lin Qi was getting conceited. He laughed and said, "How are you doing here at the outpost? It must be really difficult, right? If I had known that all of you were here, I would have brought over the pound of pork allocated to me by the troops so that you can have a taste of some meat. After all, it's not easy for you all to get any meat in a place like this, unlike me who gets to have it every day." If he had mentioned anything else but this, it would have been fine. But when it came to the topic of having meat to eat, Ren Xiaosu and the others started looking a little funny. Honestly speaking, they would prefer having more vegetables in their diets right now. Having too much meat really did not help with their digestion. But Ren Xiaosu felt that if Lin Qi were really willing to share some meat with them, it would mean he was still kind at heart even though he was a little showy. They would just treat it as someone giving them compensation so they could look good, something that wouldn't hurt them at all. But Lin Qi's tone took a turn at this moment. "Forget it, it wouldn't be good if I brought meat for you refugees. If I let you have a taste of meat, I'd be bringing harm to you if you don't have the appetite for anything else in the future." Ren Xiaosu nearly burst out laughing. Beside him, Li Qingzheng stood up and laughed along humbly. "Dear sirs, to what do we owe your distinguished visitation?" Lin Qi's expression turned a little dark when his words were cut off by Li Qingzheng, who changed the topic. However, he still answered very quickly, "We're here to offer fire support to our comrades to rein in the threat of the wolves in these mountains. But this area is not going to be the main battlefield. That will be the next outpost where even more troops are currently waiting." Ren Xiaosu was startled. Surely there was a problem with the intel the Li Consortium received, right? But he soon understood. The previous wolf attack had taken place in the vicinity of the next outpost, which was why the Li Consortium's troops thought the wolves' area of activity was closer to the mountain range over there. It was no wonder more than 40 nano-soldiers had gathered here. Based on his fight with the nano-soldiers, and assuming these nano-soldiers here were at the same level as those he had faced, he felt they wouldn't amount to any threat to the wolf pack. However, he could not dismiss these nano-soldiers either, because he had recently realized the nano-machines might still have a lot of functions he hadn't discovered yet. He was using it purely as external armor right now. This was the perfect opportunity for him to observe how these nano-soldiers did battle. The outpost's soldiers stood at the side, not daring to utter a word. Only Li Qingzheng went over to the officers to ask if they needed any assistance and if they wanted to eat lunch here. However, Lin Qi proudly laughed and said, "We're on official duty here, so how could we have time to eat lunch here? We usually carry our own rations when we're out on a mission. If we eat anything unhygienic here at your place and get the runs, none of you will be able to answer for it." "Yes, that's right." Li Qingzheng pretended to smile and said, "You're absolutely correct." In reality, Lin Qi's resentment was mainly focused on Ren Xiaosu. After all, he did not have anything against the rest of the refugees. Just based on the difference of their statuses, he was quite satisfied. But during their escape, Ren Xiaosu's group really had it too easy while the rest of them had to endure starvation. Now that he was elevated in status, he naturally wanted to compare. Of course, Ren Xiaosu could also understand this. At this moment, Lin Qi said, I heard that the rice supply sent here was mixed with sand. I had heard about how the living conditions of those of you who were recruited by the private army during the expansion isn't too good. Do you usually have enough to eat? It's not too bad. Li Qingzheng said with a smile, we're still able to pick some wild vegetables to add to our meals sometimes. He couldn't possibly tell them that they had meat to eat, right? There was no such thing as not having enough to eat around here, but it would definitely intensify the conflict if he said that now. However, Lin Qi continued, you won't have enough strength if you just eat wild vegetables and not have a staple food. Don't let it get in the way of performing your sentry duty. Chen Wudi asked Ren Xiaosu at the side, Master, what does a staple food mean? Ren Xiaosu thought for a moment before giving him a short answer. Food that you always eat. When Lin Qi heard the conversation between Chen Wudi and Ren Xiaosu, he said to Chen Wudi with a laugh, you're such a crazy fool. A staple food refers to food like rice and noodles. Chen Wudi shook his head. That's not right, our staple food is meat. Lin Qi, Li Qingzheng and Ren Xiaosu realized this was going to be bad. That fool of a kid had somehow spilled the beans. However, they then discovered that Lin Qi did not seem to believe what Chen Wudi had said. They heard Lin Qi say with a sigh, you're even turning to lying in order to boost your pitiful self-esteem, I see. But even though Lin Qi did not believe it, the other officers started getting suspicious. You all have meat here. Ren Xiaosu's heart sank. Some of these people were quite astute. Li Qingzheng laughed and replied, haha, he was just kidding. How could we possibly have any meat here? But that soldier did not let go of the matter just because of Li Qingzhen's explanation. He went towards outpost. There's something off about your outpost. Ren Xiaosu said calmly, so you've found out. Ren Xiaosu then headed to one of the houses in the outpost. He opened the door of that house with everyone looking, only to reveal Hu Shuo inside. It was obvious that Hu Shuo was a high-ranking official in the stronghold. How else could he command a group of elite soldiers comparable to those the consortium had? Since this old man was planning to spend the Lunar New Year here, Ren Xiaosu brought him out to shield them from any further trouble during a crisis. Hu Shuo looked calmly at Ren Xiaosu, and Ren Xiaosu looked calmly at Hu Shuo as well. Hu Shuo got so angry he almost laughed. He had specifically gone into the house to avoid meeting these people. One of the officers said in surprise, Sir, what are you doing here? Hu Shuo slowly stepped out. Oh, I'm here to investigate something, so my little friends here at the outpost are providing me with some assistance. Sorry, we didn't expect you to be here. I'm a soldier of the 7th Brigade and have been assigned to the Divine Arms Battalion, the soldier said humbly while bowing deeply. For a refugee like Lin Qi who had only recently been recruited into the combat troops, he definitely would not know who Hu Shuo was. But this officer had been a soldier of the Li Consortium for a while and recognized Hu Shuo immediately. When Ren Xiaosu saw this unfold, he nearly gasped. Just who was this Hu Shuo supposed to be? This nano-soldier was behaving so arrogantly just now, so what made him become so humble all of a sudden? If only Chen Wudi could explain it more clearly, then Ren Xiaosu could have at least figured out how strong this Hu Shuo was. Hu Shuo smiled amiably at the officers and said, you guys have work to do, so I won't waste your time. That soldier immediately stood to attention. Yes, sir. Then he ordered the others to quickly unload their gear from the vehicles and wear it. Ren Xiaosu observed them and discovered there wasn't much of a difference between these nano-soldiers' gear and what the ordinary soldiers wore. They were all standard-issue combat uniforms and individual weapons of war, while one of the officers was carrying a portable radio transceiver. After all, the distance between the outposts were some dozens of kilometers away from each other, so they needed to use the radios to communicate and share intel. The only difference was that these soldiers were each equipped with a long saber that was sheathed in a black leather scabbard. Ren Xiaosu could not tell what kind of material this sword was made of. But if it was something the nano-soldiers carried, it probably wasn't any ordinary weapon. Someone asked that soldier while they were donning their gear, "Who's that old man?" That soldier's expression changed. "Don't ask. Let's head into the mountains and get out of here." He sounded terrified of Hu Shuo. When Ren Xiaosu saw this, he couldn't figure out what was so scary about Hu Shuo. Everyone at the outpost watched as these officers fell silent en masse before hurrying off deep into Mount Kun. After they left, Ren Xiaosu laughed and said, "I won't ask you any questions for the next 3 days." When Hu Shuo heard this, the annoyance of getting betrayed by Ren Xiaosu lessened a little. Ren Xiaosu followed up with a smile and said, "You see, it can't get out that we have all this meat here. Otherwise, you're not going to have a peaceful new year either. Don't take this undeserved gain for granted," Hu Shuo snapped at him. "But I'm curious about something." Ren Xiaosu asked, "I know that Lin Qi too, and he didn't used to be a soldier. He only joined the army for a few days, but they're already sending him out on a mission." Hu Shuo shot him a look. "What are you trying to ask? Soldiers are required to train for a long time before being deployed." Ren Xiaosu said in seriousness, "Whether it be their discipline or combat skills, those are not qualities that can be instilled quickly. So I'm curious why the Li Consortium is so anxious to deploy them. They can't even be considered recruits, right?" Even though Lin Qi and the other officers were fully geared and were even equipped with special close-quarters combat weapons, did they really know how to use them? Therefore, Ren Xiaosu felt that if he could anticipate such a problem, the Li Consortium would definitely have also thought of it. Because they need to gather actual combat data and collect the data of nanomachine use in battle. Hu Shuo did not hide it from Ren Xiaosu. Ever since the breakthrough in neurotech that made it possible for nanomachines to interface with neurons, there hasn't been any actual combat testing by the Li Consortium's nano-soldiers. So they're curious about how effective these nano-soldiers are. Aren't they afraid of taking huge losses? Ren Xiaosu wondered. "What losses?" Hu Shuo laughed. "It's only a few lives, that's all. The ratio of nano-soldiers selected from the screening isn't as low as you might imagine. Don't tell me you haven't realized that, other than the one experienced soldier leading the group, the rest of the troops were made up of refugees? To them, soldiers trained with their money are like gold, while refugees only serve as a tool. Did you really think they lack candidates with high synchronization rates?" Ren Xiaosu was stunned. "So these people, they were all sent here to die for the sake of collecting data? Was the Li Consortium that vicious? Wait, isn't a requirement of 80% synchronization very high?" Ren Xiaosu could not understand this. What exactly does this synchronization rate refer to? The synchronization rate is the degree to which you can perfectly control the nanomachines. Hu Shuo explained, but this isn't set in stone. By undergoing physical training and responsiveness coaching, it can be steadily improved. Of course, there's also a limit to everyone's improvement potential. It's just like how some people naturally have better athleticism than others. It's also down to one's talent as well. That meant that even those with a low synchronization rate might still be able to control the nanomachines. It was only a matter of how efficiently they could do it. For example, even though you might order it to turn into external armor now, it only turned into external armor a year later. If that was the case, then what was the point of having the nanomachines turn into armor? Wouldn't it be more efficient to turn it straight into a coffin instead? The user would have already died anyway. However, even though Ren Xiaosu's synchronization was 0%, he sensed that the nanomachines were very obedient to his commands. They would do whatever he needed them to do without any delay. He asked, "Then what does having an extremely low synchronization rate mean? Does it mean that the user is a vegetable?" Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu meaningfully and said, "There are special cases too. After a person becomes a supernatural being, their independent consciousness will reject the nanomachines, thus leading to a low synchronization rate. That means that person has an extremely powerful consciousness. Ren Xiaosu froze at the words. However, he soon got around it when he realized Hu Shuo was bluffing. If the Li Consortium already knew this from the research, he and Chen Wudi, who had gotten a synchronization rate of 0% and 1% respectively, would have been targeted by the Li Consortium. Ha! Who would have thought Hu Shuo was quite cunning? However, Ren Xiaosu still had doubts about the Li Consortium's decision to send in recruits like Lin Qi and the others to take on the wolves. Don't the nanomachines cost anything? The nanomachines they have in them should be worth a lot of money too, right? Nanomachines can be recycled. Hu Shuo said calmly, even if the soldiers die, the nanomachines won't die. When the real elite troops get here, they'll be able to retrieve all the nanomachines scattered in the wilderness. That did sound quite logical. And thus, Ren Xiaosu had nothing more to say. However, he did not think that Hu Shuo was totally correct. At the very least, this group of soldiers' nanomachines were not going to be retrievable by the Li Consortium anymore. The snowy mountain was covered in fog. Lin Qi and the rest of the troops were walking in the wilderness at this time and using the radio to maintain communications with the main force at the neighboring outpost. This coordination made it feel like it was a military exercise. The main man of the group was the soldier who spoke to Hu Shuo, while the rest of the troops were just as Hu Shuo had said, recruits who had just joined the Li Consortium's combat troops. They had thought that after joining the army, they would be subject to very rigorous training as recruits, as well as undergo military-style training on how to operate the nanomachines. But that wasn't the case at all. After undergoing just some brief training, they were immediately assigned on their first-ever mission. But of course, no one rejected this. After all, they heard of how tough the training was for recruits, so it was best that they did not have to suffer through any of that. No one felt suspicious of anything. The joy of having their statuses elevated had blunted their judgment. Even though there was a mismatch in the information they knew, it left them with no opportunity to be judgmental. Lin Qi only thought that since they met the synchronization standard, it meant they were special. Captain Zhou, who was that old man? Lin Qi asked. Don't ask, Captain Zhou answered. Just don't provoke him. In the entire Li Consortium army, he's one you should not offend most of all. What should we do next? Someone asked. Captain Zhou thought for a bit before saying, scout ahead. One of the officers suddenly stepped forward. A silvery liquid metal started seeping out from underneath his skin and landed on the ground. In an instant, that silvery liquid metal suddenly turned into 5 small, silvery snakes that slithered towards the depths of the mountain. Captain Zhou asked, what's the furthest range of your control? It was assessed at 418 meters during the previous test, the platoon member replied. All right, that's good enough for our purposes. Captain Zhou said, keep a careful lookout on the surroundings and maintain the range so you don't lose control of the nanomachines. The key is to not be careless. Once you discover anything odd with the nanomachines, inform me. Roger, answered the platoon member. Lin Qi suddenly said, but Captain, this isn't where the wolves were active. Besides, we have 5 squads conducting a simultaneous search. There shouldn't be any danger, right? Honestly, if a battle were to break out, it would be really difficult to depend on Lin Qi and the others even if they had nanomachines in them, because they did not have any actual combat experience. Captain Zhou looked at him and said, just listen to my orders and everything will be fine. But right at this moment, the soldier controlling the nanorobotic, silver snakes suddenly exclaimed, this is bad. Captain Zhou was startled. What's the matter? Is it the wolves? No. I don't think so. The soldier hesitated for a moment before saying, a shadow just flashed by up ahead and stole away one of my silver snakes. Captain Zhou froze for a moment. It didn't do anything else and only took your silver snake away. That's right. It ran off after catching it. Everyone was starting to get suspicious. What the fuck just happened?